He called me trash with a smile so polite it could have been engraved on the silverware. 20 of his friends laughed like it was charming while my husband froze. But the man insulting me was minutes away from signing the deal that would decide whether his empire lived or died. He did not know I was the one holding the pen, or that I could end him with a single email. My name is Addison Rivera. I am 36 years old. And tonight, I walked into the lion's den wearing a dress that cost more than the average American makes in 3 months. Though no one at the table would ever guess it. To them, value is not about the price tag attached to the fabric. Value is about the bloodline attached to the person wearing it. And in the eyes of the people sitting in this dining room, my bloodline was non-existent. The Wexford estate in Palm Crest, Florida, was designed to make you feel small. That was not an accident of architecture. It was a deliberate psychological strategy. The ceilings were 20 feet high. The floors were marble so polished you could see the fear in your own reflection if you looked down long enough. The air smelled of salted ocean breeze and old money, a scent that somehow always reminded me of copper coins and cold steel. I walked into the dining room with my husband, Nolan Wexford. His hand was on the small of my back, but it was not a touch of reassurance. It was a touch of anxiety. His fingers were trembling. Just slightly. A tremor so faint, only a wife would notice it. Nolan was 38 years old, a grown man with an Ivy League degree and a seat on the board of 3 charities. But the moment we crossed the threshold of his father's house, he reverted to a frightened boy of 7, desperate to avoid a scolding. The room was already full. 20 guests, the cream of the crop, the inner circle of Palm Crest. These were people who did not just own companies, they owned legislation. They owned silence. They were the kind of people who spoke about the economy as if it were a pet they kept in the backyard. At the head of the table sat Harlan Wexford. My father-in-law was a man who took up space even when he was sitting perfectly still. He was 65, with silver hair that looked like it had been spun from steel wool, and eyes that had never blinked in uncertainty in their entire life. He was the chairman of Wexford Dominion, a massive conglomerate of energy and infrastructure that practically owned the power grid of the Southeast. Tonight, he looked like a king holding court. He saw us enter. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply gestured to the empty chairs with a flick of his wrist, as if we were servants arriving late to clear the plates. "Sit," Harlan said. Nolan guided me toward the table. I expected to sit next to my husband. That was the custom. That was etiquette. That was basic human decency. But as we approached the long mahogany table, I saw the name cards. Nolan's card was placed on the right side of his father. The seat of the heir. The seat of honor. My card was not there. I scanned the table. I saw names of senators, CEOs, and heiresses, and then, I found it, Addison Rivera. My card was placed at the very far end of the table, near the swinging door that led to the kitchen. It was a seat usually reserved for a personal assistant or a tutor, certainly not for the wife of the host's son. The message was clear. It was surgical. You are not family. You are barely a guest. Nolan froze. He saw it too. For a second, I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. He opened his mouth, and I thought, for one beautiful, delusional second, that he was going to say something. I thought he was going to pull out the chair next to him and tell the senator's wife to move. I thought he was going to be the husband I needed him to be. But then Harlan cleared his throat. It was a low, rumbling sound. Nolan's mouth snapped shut. The anger in his eyes dissolved into panic. He looked at me, pleading silently. "Please don't make a scene. Please just take it." I looked at him. I held his gaze for 3 long seconds. In those 3 seconds, I learned more about our marriage than I had in the last 3 years. I walked to the end of the table. The conversation did not stop, but eyes followed me. They were shark eyes, cold, curious, waiting for blood. I pulled out my own chair. The wood scraped slightly against the floor. I sat down. The swinging door to the kitchen was directly behind me. Every time a server came out with a tray, a draft of cold air hit my neck. Dinner began. The first course was a truffle soup that probably cost $500 a bowl. I did not lift my spoon. I just watched. I watched Harlan holding court. He was in his element. He was talking about the new infrastructure bill, about how Wexford Dominion was poised to monopolize the coastal grid renovation project. "It is about stability," Harlan said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the end of the table where I sat in exile. "The market needs strong hands. It needs lineage. You look at these new tech companies, these startups popping up in Silicon Valley. They have no roots. They have no history. They blow over like sand dunes in a hurricane." A woman halfway down the table, a pharmaceutical heiress with diamonds heavy enough to bruise her collarbone, nodded enthusiastically. "You are so right. Harlan, it is about breeding. You can teach a dog to do tricks, but you cannot teach it to be a wolf." Harlan laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Exactly. That is what I tell Nolan all the time. You have to be careful who you let into the circle. You have to protect the integrity of the name." Nolan was staring at his soup as if he hoped to drown in it. He was not eating. He was sweating. I sat with my back straight. I did not shrink. I did not look down. I looked directly at Harlan. I knew he could feel my gaze. It was the only thing in the room that he could not control. He turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine down the length of the table. The conversation around us died down. The guests sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. They were predators. They knew when a kill was coming. "Addison," Harlan said. He said my name like it was a diagnosis. "You are quiet tonight. Usually. You have so many opinions about things you do not understand." I smiled. It was a practiced smile. "I am just listening. Harlan, it is fascinating to hear how the other half thinks." "The other half?" Harlan raised an eyebrow. "My dear, there is no other half at this table. We are the whole. That is the point of Palm Crest." He picked up his wine glass. He swirled the dark red liquid, watching the legs run down the glass. "We were just discussing the importance of standards, of knowing one's place in the ecosystem. Nolan tells me you have been looking into some charity work. Something about helping the homeless?" "Affordable housing initiatives," I corrected him calmly. Harlan smirked. He looked around the table, inviting his audience to share the joke. "Affordable housing. See? This is what I mean. It is quaint. It is a nice little hobby, but it is small thinking." He leaned forward. The candlelight flickered across his face, casting long shadows that made him look like a gargoyle. "You see, Addison, in this world, there are people who build the table, and there are people who serve the table, and then there are people who should be grateful they are allowed in the room at all." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the servers had stopped moving. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. Nolan looked up. "Dad," he whispered. It was weak. It was pathetic. Harlan ignored him. He kept his eyes on me. "I was talking to my associates earlier today about the importance of quality control. In business, in investments, in families." He took a sip of wine, swallowed, and then delivered the line he had probably rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Trash doesn't sit at the table, Addison. It gets fed wherever the staff eats." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then, someone chuckled. It started as a small, nervous sound from the pharmaceutical heiress. But it grew. The man next to her laughed. Then the senator. It rippled around the table. A soft, polite, cruel laughter. It was the sound of a group confirming their membership by excluding an outsider. They were laughing because they were relieved it wasn't them. They were laughing because Harlan was rich, and when the rich make a joke, you laugh, even if it is not funny, especially if it is not funny. My heart hammered against my ribs. It beat so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat, hot and violent. The adrenaline flooded my system, the ancient fight-or-flight response screaming at me to run, or to scream, or to throw the crystal wine glass at his face, but I did none of those things. I had spent 10 years building a fortress around my emotions. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals in boardrooms where men called me sweetheart right before I bought their companies out from under them. I knew something Harlan did not know. I knew that anger was a gift you gave your enemy, and I was not feeling generous tonight. I picked up my napkin. I folded it. I placed it gently on the table next to the untouched silverware. The laughter died down as they waited for my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted a tantrum. They wanted me to prove Harlan right by acting like the trash he claimed I was. I looked Harlan dead in the eye. I did not blink. I kept my voice low, steady, and clear. It carried through the room without me raising it a single decibel. "Thank you for dinner, Harlan," I said. "And thank you for the clarity." Harlan frowned. He had expected a fight, not gratitude. "Clarity?" "Yes," I said. "It is impressive how loud insecurity can sound when it wears a tux." The room did not just go silent. It froze. It was the kind of silence that happens after a gunshot. The guests looked at Harlan, then at me, terrified. I had just insulted the king in his own castle. I had called the billionaire insecure to his face. Harlan's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the vintage wine. His jaw worked, but no words came out. He was so used to fear that he had no script for defiance. Nolan stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the marble. A harsh, jarring noise. "Addison," he stammered. "Addison, wait, Dad didn't mean. He is just stressed. The deal. He was looking at me, but his body was angled toward his father. He was trying to mediate. He was trying to fix it, but he was too late. He was exactly 10 seconds too late. If he had stood up when Harlan made the trash comment, we might have had a chance. If he had slammed his hand on the table and demanded respect for his wife. I might have stayed, but he had waited. He had waited until I defended myself to intervene. He wasn't protecting me from his father. He was protecting his father from me. I looked at my husband. I felt a crack run through the center of my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. Exactly. It was the sound of a foundation snapping. "Sit down, Nolan," I said softly. "Addison, please," he begged. "Don't go. Enjoy the soup," I told him. "It looks expensive." I turned my back on the table. I turned my back on the 20 silent guests, the chandeliers, the marble, and the man who thought he ruled the world. I walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the floor. A rhythmic, steady sound. Click, click, click. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who owns her own time. I pushed open the double doors and stepped into the grand hallway. The air here was cooler, free of the stifling heat of egos. As I made my way toward the front entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows of the library. It was a man I did not recognize. He was holding a drink, leaning against the doorframe. He wasn't one of the dinner guests. He was dressed in a suit that was sharper, more modern than the ones in the dining room. He looked at me. He didn't say a word, but his eyes locked onto mine with a strange intensity. It wasn't a flirtatious look. It was a look of recognition. He tilted his glass slightly in my direction, a tiny, almost invisible salute. Then he turned and disappeared back into the shadows of the library. I frowned, the image of him lingering in my mind for a second. It felt like he knew something. It felt like he knew who I really was, but I pushed the thought away. I had bigger things to worry about. I walked out the front door and into the humid Florida night. The valet was nowhere to be seen. My car, a sensible, 4-year-old sedan that Harlan hated, was parked way at the back, boxed in between a bright yellow Lamborghini and a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was a perfect metaphor. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my shoes. I could hear the ocean crashing against the cliffs below. It was a violent sound, chaotic and relentless. Inside the house, Harlan Wexford was probably laughing again, thinking he had won. He was probably signing the papers for the deal that he believed would save his empire. He thought I was just the trash he had taken out. He had no idea that the trash was about to buy the landfill. The humidity of the Florida night wrapped around me like a wet wool blanket the moment I stepped outside. It was a suffocating, heavy heat that made your skin prickle and your clothes cling to your body within seconds. I walked across the crushed white gravel of the driveway, the sound of my heels grinding against the stones echoing in the quiet night. The ocean was roaring somewhere in the distance, a rhythmic thrashing against the cliffs that sounded less like nature and more like a warning. My car was parked at the very end of the row, shoved into a corner near the hedges as if the valet had been ashamed to touch it. It was a sensible, 4-year-old sedan, gray and practical. Flanking it on the left was a bright yellow Lamborghini that looked like it was screaming for attention even when the engine was off. On the right was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, black and massive, looming like a hearse for the living. My car looked like a mistake between them. It looked like an intrusion. It was a deliberate visual metaphor for my entire existence within the Wexford family. I was the gray sedan in a world of supercars, functional, invisible, and easily replaced. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling just slightly. It was not fear. It was the aftershock of adrenaline. It was the physical vibration of rage that I had suppressed for 2 hours inside that dining room. "Addison, wait!" The voice came from the front steps. I did not turn around. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. I knew the exact weight of them. It was Nolan. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was warm. The interior smelled of vanilla air freshener and the faint, lingering scent of my own perfume. It smelled like safety. It smelled like a place where I did not have to be trash. Nolan reached the car before I could close the door. He grabbed the frame, his knuckles white, his chest heaving. He had run all the way from the dining room, ruining the pristine line of his tuxedo. His tie was slightly askew, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Addison, please," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Don't just leave like this." I sat there, one hand on the steering wheel, the other hovering over the ignition button. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was a handsome man. He had the Wexford jawline and the Wexford height, but he had none of the Wexford steel. His eyes were wide, pleading, filled with the desperate hope of a child who wants to unbreak a vase before his parents get home. "Get your hand off my door." "Nolan," I said. My voice was calm. It was terrifyingly calm. He didn't move. "You have to understand. He is drunk. He has had 3 scotches before dinner. He didn't mean it." "He didn't mean it?" I repeated the words slowly, tasting the absurdity of them. "He called me trash. Nolan. He told 20 of his closest friends that I belong in the kitchen with the staff." Which part of that was accidental? Was it the noun or the verb? "It is the stress," Nolan pleaded, leaning in, invading my space with the smell of the expensive wine he had been drinking while I was being humiliated. "You don't know what is happening with the company. He is under an immense amount of pressure. He snaps. You know he snaps. It is just his way." I looked at my husband, and I felt a wave of exhaustion so heavy it almost crushed me. "His way," I said softly. "You talk about him like he is a force of nature, like he is a hurricane we just have to board up the windows and endure. But he is not a hurricane, Nolan. He is a man. He is a bully. And tonight, he decided that I was the target." "I know," Nolan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know it was bad. And I am sorry. I should have said something sooner. I was shocked. I froze." "You always freeze," I said. The truth hung in the humid air between us, sharp and undeniable. Nolan flinched as if I had slapped him. "That is not fair." "It is the only fair thing happening tonight," I countered. "You froze when he made fun of my degree last Thanksgiving. You froze when he criticized our house last Christmas. And tonight, when he called your wife garbage in front of the senator, you stared at your soup." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "He didn't just insult me, Nolan. He placed me beneath him. He established a hierarchy, and by staying silent. You agreed with him. A man who does not protect his wife at a dinner table is not protecting anything. He is just serving a master." Nolan let go of the doorframe. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair. He looked defeated. He looked like the air had been let out of him. "I am trying to protect us. Addison, you don't understand the stakes." "Then explain them," I said. "Explain to me why letting your father dehumanize me is a strategic necessity for our marriage." Nolan looked toward the house, checking to make sure no one had followed him. He lowered his voice, speaking in a rush. "The company is in trouble, real trouble. The infrastructure expansion in the Midwest drained our liquidity. The banks are getting nervous. The stock has been volatile for 6 months. If the quarterly earnings miss the mark next week, the board might call for a vote of no confidence." I listened, my face remaining impassive. I knew all of this. I read the financial reports of Wexford Dominion better than Harlan did. I knew their debt-to-equity ratio was a disaster waiting to happen. "So he is broke," I said flatly. "That explains the temper, but it doesn't excuse the cruelty." "He is not broke," Nolan hissed. "He is leveraged. There is a difference, but he has a plan. That is why tonight was so important. That is why he is so on edge. He is minutes away from closing a deal that will save everything. It is a massive capital injection, a partnership that will stabilize the stock and give us the cash flow to finish the grid project." I felt a small, cold spark ignite in the center of my chest. "A partnership," I said. "With whom?" "It is a private equity group," Nolan said, clearly relieved to be talking about business instead of his moral failure. "Very secretive. They specialize in green energy turnarounds. Dad calls it a survival deal. He thinks this partner is going to be the white knight that rescues the Wexford legacy." "And what is the name of this white knight?" I asked. My voice was casual, barely a whisper over the sound of the distant ocean. Nolan hesitated. "We don't have a face. The whole thing is run through a proxy structure. The principal investor is hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies. They call themselves Project Harborline." The world stopped. For a second, the sound of the ocean vanished. The humidity vanished. The sight of Nolan standing there in his tuxedo vanished. Project Harborline. I stared at my husband, but I was not seeing him. I was seeing a conference room in Seattle 3 months ago. I was seeing a stack of documents on a glass table. I was seeing my signature on the bottom of a page, authorizing the formation of a special purpose vehicle designed to acquire distressed energy assets. Harlan Wexford's savior was not a mysterious group of investors. It was me. I was the majority shareholder of Asterhaven Systems, the clean energy giant that had been quietly eating up the market share Wexford Dominion was losing. Project Harborline was my acquisition arm. I had set it up specifically to target companies with good infrastructure but bad leadership. I had designed it to be anonymous because I knew that if Harlan Wexford knew the money was coming from a woman, let alone his daughter-in-law, he would burn his company to the ground before taking a dime. He was begging for my money while calling me trash. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical cut. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw my head back and scream with laughter. The man who had just told me I belonged with the servants was currently praying to a god that turned out to be me. But I did not laugh. I did not smile. I let the information settle into my bones, cold and heavy. This changed everything. This was not just a marital dispute anymore. This was leverage. This was a weapon. "Addison?" Nolan asked, stepping closer again. "Are you okay? You look pale." He thought I was hurt. He thought I was reeling from the revelation that his family empire was crumbling. He had no idea I was calculating the liquidation value of his inheritance. "I am fine," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and metallic. "Look," Nolan said, trying to seize the moment of silence. "Just go home. Let me finish up here. I have to be in the room when the letter of intent is signed. Dad expects me there. Once the deal is locked, he will calm down. I will talk to him tomorrow. I will make him apologize. I promise." "He won't apologize," I said. "And if he does, it won't matter." "It will matter," Nolan insisted. "We can fix this. I love you. Addison, you know I love you. I looked at him. I saw the sincerity in his eyes, and that was the tragedy of it. He did love me. He loved me as much as a man without a spine can love anything. But love without courage is just a sentiment. It is useless when the war starts. I know you love me, Nolan, I said. But love is just the paint on the walls. Respect is the foundation. And tonight, the foundation just cracked. I pressed the ignition button. The engine of my sensible sedan purred to life. It was a quiet, reliable sound. Addison, wait. Nolan reached for the handle again. Go back inside, I told him. Go stand next to your father. Go witness history. I put the car in reverse. But remember one thing, Nolan. When you sign that deal, make sure you read the fine print. I didn't wait for his answer. I backed out of the spot, swinging the nose of my car away from the yellow Lamborghini and the black Rolls-Royce. I shifted into drive and pressed the gas. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove away. He stood alone on the white gravel, a small, dark figure against the blazing lights of the mansion. He looked lost. He looked like a man who had been left behind. But he didn't even know the ship had sailed yet. I drove through the massive iron gates of the estate and turned onto the coastal highway. The road was empty. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, rhythmic shadows across the dashboard. My mind was racing. I wasn't thinking about the insult anymore. I was thinking about the structure of the deal. I was thinking about the clauses I had inserted into the letter of intent. I was thinking about the moral turpitude clause that my lawyers had insisted on. Standard boilerplate language that allowed the investor to pull out if the leadership demonstrated behavior that could damage the company's reputation. Behaving like a tyrant at a dinner party full of potential witnesses? That sounded like damaged reputation to me. I drove for 20 minutes in silence, the anger slowly crystallizing into a plan. I was not going to cry. I was not going to go home and eat ice cream. I was going to go to war. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up. It was 11:58 at night. The name on the screen was Marcus Thorne. He was the general counsel for Asterhaven and the head of the legal team managing Project Harborline. He never called me this late unless the building was on fire or someone had died. I pressed the answer button on the steering wheel. Addison, Marcus's voice came through the speakers, crisp and alert. He sounded like he had been awake for days. Tell me, I said. We just got a call from the Wexford team, Marcus said. They are pushing. They want to move the signing ceremony. They are claiming market volatility, but they sound desperate. They want to lock it in by 8 o'clock Monday morning. They are trying to bypass the final due diligence window. I gripped the steering wheel. 8 o'clock Monday morning. Harlan was panicking. He wanted the money before the truth of his finances caught up with him. Who made the call? I asked. Harlan himself, Marcus said. He called our proxy CEO and practically shouted the demand. He threatened to walk if we didn't expedite. He is bluffing. Obviously, he has nowhere else to go, but he is aggressive. I looked out at the dark ocean rushing past my window. I remembered the way Harlan had looked at me, the sneer, the absolute certainty that I was nothing. He thinks he is holding the cards, I whispered. What was that? Marcus asked. Should we push back? I can stall them for 48 hours. We can cite the compliance review. No, I said. Don't stall. I signaled to turn onto the bridge that led back to the city. The lights of the skyline were ahead of me, glittering like diamonds on black velvet. Addison? Marcus, I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. Do we still have the termination clause for incompatible leadership values in the draft? Yes, it is standard. Why? And the break fee? I asked. If we walk away now, what does it cost us? It is significant, Marcus warned. $3 million in penalty fees plus the legal costs. It is a waste of capital. Addison, we are at the finish line. This deal is a goldmine for us. Pay it, I said. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a long, confused silence. I am sorry. Did you say pay it? Pay the fee, I repeated. Terminate the letter of intent. Pull the financial guarantee from the bank. I want a formal notice sent to Harlan Wexford's personal email tonight. Not to his lawyers. To him. Addison. This is $1 billion acquisition, Marcus said, his professional calm cracking just a little. You are killing the deal because of values? I am not killing the deal. Marcus, I said, merging onto the highway, the speed of the car increasing as my resolve hardened. I am changing the terms. I don't understand. You don't need to yet, I said. Just send the email and list the reason for termination exactly as I say it. Okay, Marcus said slowly. I am ready. What is the reason? I stared at the road ahead. I saw Harlan's face. I saw the way he smiled when he called me trash. Incompatible leadership values, I said. And Marcus? Yes? Make sure you schedule a meeting for me on Monday morning, I said. Not with Wexford. Get me a sit-down with their biggest competitor. I want Harlan to hear about it before his morning coffee gets cold. Understood, Marcus said. Consider it done. The line went dead. I was alone in the car again. But I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the woman in the gray sedan squeezed between the supercars. I felt like the person who owned the road. I drove into the night, leaving the Wexford estate behind me in the darkness. Harlan Wexford had wanted to teach me my place. He had wanted to show me where I belonged. He was right. I didn't belong at his table. I belonged at the head of it. And by Monday morning, I was going to take the chair he was sitting in. My sensible gray sedan rolled into the driveway of the modest colonial house I shared with Nolan. It was a perfectly adequate house. It was respectable. It was the kind of house a mid-level executive and his supportive wife were supposed to live in. It was nothing like the Wexford estate, and that was exactly why I had chosen it. But as I cut the engine, the silence of the suburb felt different tonight. It did not feel peaceful. It felt like the quiet before a demolition. I did not go to the bedroom. I did not go to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine and cry over the way my husband had looked at his shoes while his father called me garbage. I walked straight down the hallway to the study at the back of the house. This was technically my craft room in Nolan's eyes. He thought I spent my time in here managing household budgets and perhaps dabbling in some freelance consulting. He never asked too many questions about why the door had a biometric lock or why the server rack in the closet hummed with the kind of cooling fans usually reserved for data centers. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The lock clicked open with a heavy, mechanical thud. Inside, the room was cool and lit only by the standby lights of 3 monitors mounted on the wall. I sat down in my chair, an ergonomic masterpiece that cost more than Nolan's car, and woke the system. The screens flared to life, flooding the room with streams of data. Real-time market analytics from Tokyo and Hong Kong, energy sector volatility indices, and the encrypted communication channels of my empire. The phone on the desk, a secure line that bypassed the residential network entirely, began to ring. It was a sharp, urgent trill. I picked it up. This is Rivera. Mrs. Rivera. We have the full team on the line. A deep, gravelly voice said. It was Elias Rook, the senior partner at Rook and Vale Advisory. He was a man who charged $2,000 an hour to tell people things they did not want to hear. We also have Julian Vale from the Mergers and Acquisitions desk and the lead counsel for the Harbor Line project. Go ahead, Elias, I said, leaning back. Brief me. We just received a formal communication from the Wexford Dominion negotiation team, Elias said. His voice was tight. They are attempting to force an accelerated closing. They have unilaterally moved the signing window to 8 o'clock this coming Monday morning. I watched the digital clock on my screen. It was just past midnight on Friday. That gave us less than 60 hours. Reasoning? I asked. They are citing market volatility. Julian Vale chimed in. He sounded younger, sharper, more anxious. They claim that the energy sector opening on Monday is unpredictable, and they want to secure the capital injection before the bell rings. They are framing it as risk management. But Mrs. Rivera, This is panic. This is not standard procedure. You do not push $1 billion closing forward by 3 days unless you are bleeding out. I know, I said softly. Who authorized the request? Julian? Was it their legal team? There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that lawyers make when they are about to say something unprofessional. No, Elias said. It wasn't legal. It wasn't the CFO. Harlan Wexford called the bank personally. Then he called our proxy representative. He was shouting, Addison. He told the bank that if the funds were not in escrow by Monday morning, he would consider the deal to have been negotiated in bad faith, and he would walk. I swiveled my chair toward the window. Looking out at the dark backyard, I could see the swing set we had bought for the children we did not have yet. He threatened to walk, I repeated, a dry smile touching my lips. He is bluffing, Elias said. We have seen their books. We know the reality. Wexford Dominion has 18 days of operating cash left before they default on their primary loans. If he walks away from Project Harbor Line, he does not have a company by the end of the month. He is trying to bully the money out of us. I closed my eyes and let the image wash over me. Harlan Wexford, the man who had sat at the head of that long mahogany table tonight, lecturing me on breeding in class, was currently screaming at bankers because he was terrified of becoming poor. He looked at me and saw trash, but when he looked at Project Harbor Line, he saw a god. He had no idea they were the same person. He does not know, I whispered. Excuse me? Elias asked. Nothing, I said, snapping back to the present. Let's talk about the structure. Refresh my memory on the exit clauses. Julian? Well, Julian said, the sound of papers shuffling coming through the speaker. We are in the final stage of the letter of intent. The exclusivity period is still active. If we pull out now without cause, we trigger the breakup fee. It is significant. Addison, we structured it that way to keep them locked in, but it cuts both ways. I looked at the center monitor. It displayed the corporate structure of Asterhaven Systems. To the world, Asterhaven was a faceless, massive conglomerate based in Seattle that specialized in renewable energy grid integration. It was the future. It was clean, efficient, and ruthlessly profitable, and I was the ghost in the machine. I had built it 10 years ago, right out of business school, using a small inheritance and a terrifying amount of leverage. I had grown it by acquiring failing companies, stripping out the bloat, and automating their infrastructure. When I married Nolan, I had made a choice. I wanted a life that wasn't about war. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted Sunday dinners and quiet evenings. So I had stepped back from the daily operations. I had hired a CEO to be the face of the company. I had buried my ownership under 3 layers of holding companies in Delaware and the Caymans. To Nolan, I was Addison Rivera, a woman with a modest trust fund and a lot of free time. To Harlan Wexford, I was a gold digger who had trapped his son. But to the global energy market, I was the board of directors of Asterhaven Systems. Project Harbor Line was my latest creation. It was a special purpose acquisition company I had designed specifically to save Wexford Dominion. I had done it for Nolan. I had done it because I knew how much he loved his family legacy. Even if that legacy was toxic, I was going to buy his father's company, clean it up, and hand it to Nolan on a silver platter as a retirement gift for Harlan. I had been willing to spend $1.2 billion to save the ego of a man who despised me. But that was 3 hours ago. That was before the dinner. That was before I became trash. How much is the breakup fee? I asked. I knew the number. I just wanted to hear them say it. I wanted to hear the weight of it. $25 million, Elias said gravely, plus the sunk costs of due diligence. If we terminate the letter of intent tonight, we wire $25 million to Wexford Dominion's account as a penalty. It is a complete loss of capital. And that is not the only problem. Go on, I said. If we pull out, Julian added, his voice rising in pitch, the market will react. Wexford stock will crash. Yes, but Asterhaven creates a reputation risk. We have never abandoned a deal this late in the game. Analysts will ask questions. They will wonder if we found something illegal in their books. It could cause a ripple effect in our own stock price. So you are telling me it is expensive to have principles, I said. I am telling you it is expensive to be emotional. Elias corrected me. He had been my lawyer for a decade. He was the only person allowed to speak to me that way. Addison, listen to me. Harlan is an unpleasant man. We know this. But the asset is valuable. The grid infrastructure Wexford owns is the last piece of the puzzle for your southeast expansion. If you buy them, you own the coast. Do not let a personal vendetta destroy a 10-year strategic plan. I looked at the screen again. I looked at the map of the Florida power grid. It was a web of yellow lines glowing against the black background. Elias was right. Rationally, logically, the smart move was to swallow my pride, sign the check on Monday morning, and fire Harlan Wexford 6 months later with a nice severance package. That was what a businessman would do. That was what a professional would do. But Harlan Wexford had not attacked a businessman. He had attacked me. He had attacked my dignity in a room full of people who thought money gave them the right to be cruel. Elias, I said, do you remember the first company I bought? The logistics firm in Ohio? I remember, Elias sighed. You fired the entire management team on day one. Do you remember why? Because the CEO made a joke about your age in the elevator, Elias said. No, I said. Because the CEO thought he was untouchable, and people who think they are untouchable make mistakes. They get sloppy. They stop checking the foundation because they are too busy looking at the penthouse. I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave. Harlan Wexford thinks he is untouchable. He thinks I am a variable he can control. He thinks his son is a variable he can control. He thinks the money is coming from a faceless institution that only cares about spreadsheets. Addison. Pay it, I said. The silence on the line was absolute. I beg your pardon? Julian squeaked. Pay the fee, I said, enunciating every syllable. Initiate the termination sequence for the letter of intent. I want the wire transfer of $25 million authorized immediately. Send it to their general operating account. Mark it as liquidated damages per termination of agreement. Addison. This is madness, Elias said. You are burning $25 million just to prove a point. No, Elias, I am buying my freedom, and $25 million is a discount. I pulled up the draft of the termination notice on my screen. It was a standard legal document, cold and lifeless. I scrolled to the section marked Reason for Termination. Usually, this section was filled with vague phrases like strategic realignment or market conditions. I want you to send the official notice to Harlan Wexford, I said. Not to his lawyers. Send a copy to the board of directors. Yes, but make sure the primary recipient is Harlan. Send it to the email address he uses for his country club membership. I want him to see it on his phone before he goes to bed. And what reason are we citing? Julian asked. He sounded like he was typing furiously. We can't just say he was rude at dinner. Write this down, I said. I paused, looking at the reflection of my own eyes in the dark monitor. They looked hard. They looked like the eyes of the woman who had built Astorhaven, not the woman who arranged flowers for Nolan's dinner parties. Incompatible leadership values, I said. Incompatible leadership values? Elias repeated. That is vague and incredibly insulting in the corporate world. It is accurate, I said. Harlan Wexford believes that value is determined by bloodline. Astorhaven believes value is determined by competence. Our values are incompatible. He cannot lead the company I was going to build, so I am not buying it. He will spin this, Elias warned. He will tell the press we got cold feet. He will say we couldn't afford him. Let him talk, I said. He has 48 hours to talk. After that, nobody will be listening to him. I watched the cursor blink on my screen as I authorized the fund transfer from my side. A biometric confirmation window popped up. Authorized transfer. $25 million. I pressed my thumb against the glass. The bar loaded green. Transfer complete. Somewhere in the banking ether, A fortune just moved from my pocket to Harlan Wexford's. He would wake up tomorrow $25 million richer. And yet, he would be dead in the water, because that money wasn't capital. It was a severance check for his dreams. Without the billion-dollar deal, the $25 million would just be enough to pay the lawyers for the bankruptcy proceedings. One more thing, I said, before they could disconnect. Yes, Mrs. Rivera? Elias sounded tired. He knew he had lost the argument. He was back to being a soldier. I need you to make a call for me first thing in the morning, I said. Saturday morning. I don't care if it is the weekend. Who are we calling? Sun Valley Gridworks, I said. I could practically hear Julian drop his pen. Sun Valley Gridworks was the arch nemesis of Wexford Dominion. They were the aggressive new money competitor that had been trying to eat Harlan's lunch for 5 years. Harlan hated them with a passion that bordered on religious fervor. He called them vultures and technicians. You want to talk to Sun Valley? Elias asked slowly. They are the direct competition. If we acquire Wexford, Sun Valley is the enemy. We are not acquiring Wexford anymore. Elias, I reminded him, we just terminated the deal, which means I am a free agent with a lot of capital and a sudden gap in my portfolio where a Florida energy grid used to be. You want to buy Sun Valley? Julian asked, his voice breathless. No, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. I don't want to buy them. I want to partner with them. I want you to set up a meeting with their CEO. Tell him Astor Haven Systems is looking for a regional partner to execute a hostile takeover of a distressed legacy asset. You are going to help Sun Valley eat Wexford, Elias realized. The shock in his voice was replaced by a grudging admiration. My God, Addison, that is nuclear. Harlan likes to talk about the food chain, I said, reaching for the button to end the call. He thinks he is the lion. I think it is time he met the asteroid. I will set the meeting, Elias said. Anything else? Yes, I said. When you send that termination email to Harlan, copy his son, copy Nolan, copy the husband, Elias said. Understood. Good night, gentlemen. I tapped the screen, and the line went dead. The room fell silent again, save for the hum of the servers. I sat there for a long time, watching the data streams flow like digital water. My heart was beating slow and steady. The panic from the dinner was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of business. My phone buzzed again, a notification from my bank. The wire transfer had cleared. I stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, the city lights were still burning. Somewhere out there, Harlan Wexford was probably pouring himself another scotch, celebrating the fact that he had put his daughter-in-law in her place. He was probably telling his friends that women like me didn't understand how the world worked. He was right. I didn't understand his world. I had outgrown it. I turned off the lights in the study, plunging the room into darkness. I walked out of the room and locked the door behind me. I checked my watch. It was 12:30 in the morning. The game had officially changed. The deal was dead. The check was cut. And on Monday morning, when Harlan Wexford walked into his boardroom expecting a coronation, he was going to find a funeral, and I was going to be the one wearing black. The email from Rook and Vale Advisory hit Harlan Wexford's personal inbox at 2:14 in the morning on Saturday. It was a digital assassin, silent and lethal. There was no courier, no dramatic envelope slid under a door, and no polite phone call to soften the blow. It was just a notification on a server log that I watched from my study. The subject line was stark. Notice of termination regarding letter of intent. Project Harbor Line. I imagined Harlan sleeping in his master suite, the one with the ocean view and the Egyptian cotton sheets, completely unaware that his phone, resting on the mahogany nightstand inches from his head, now contained the death warrant for his legacy. I did not sleep. I sat in the glow of my monitors, drinking black coffee and watching the dominoes I had lined up begin to teeter. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the silence broke. It started on the specialized financial forums, the dark corners of the internet where traders gossip before the rest of the world wakes up. A rumor surfaced on a message board usually reserved for energy sector speculation. Wexford deal dead. Harbor Line pulled the plug. Financial guarantees withdrawn. Information in the digital age does not walk. It teleports. By 6:15, the rumor had jumped to the pre-market analysis blogs. By 6:30, the ticker symbol for Wexford Dominion was flashing red on the Asian markets, which were still open. The algorithm bots picked up the sentiment shift and began to sell. I watched the graph on my left monitor. It was a beautiful, terrifying, jagged line pointing down. This was not just a bad day for Wexford Dominion. This was a hemorrhage. My personal phone, the one Nolan knew, sat on the corner of my desk. It began to vibrate at 6:45. I let it ring. It rang 4 times, went to voicemail, and then immediately started ringing again. It was Nolan. I stared at the screen, visualizing the scene at the Wexford estate. Harlan must have woken up. He must have seen the email. He must be pacing the floor of his library, his face purple with rage, screaming at his lawyers who were likely still asleep. And because Harlan was a man who believed power flowed downward, he was not calling me. He was calling his son to control me. I picked up the phone on the 5th attempt, but I did not say hello. I just pressed the mute button and listened. "Addison!" Nolan's voice was breathless, panicked. I could hear shouting in the background. It sounded like glass breaking. "Addison, pick up. Are you there?" I remained silent. "God, tell me she is awake." I heard Harlan's voice roar in the background. It was distant but distinct. "Give me the phone. Nolan." There was a scuffling sound. Then Harlan's voice came through the speaker, loud and distorted. "Addison, you listen to me. I don't know what kind of game you think you are playing, but you are going to fix this. You are going to call your little friends at that agency and tell them to retract whatever rumors they are spreading." He thought I was gossiping. He thought the market crash was because I had told someone about the dinner. He still did not understand. He thought I was a social liability, not a financial executioner. "This is men's business. Addison," Harlan snarled. "You shut your mouth. You keep your head down. I am fixing a mess that you probably started with your attitude last night. If reporters call you, you say nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." The line went dead. He had hung up. He had not asked for help. He had not apologized. He had issued a command. "Shut your mouth. This is men's business." I looked at the phone in my hand. "You are right, Harlan," I said to the empty room. "It is business, and you just lost." I did not call back. I did not text Nolan to ask if he was okay. Punishment is not always about screaming. Sometimes, the most violent thing you can do to a person is to withdraw your presence completely. I gave them a void. I let them scream into an abyss where no one was listening. At 7:15, the secure line on my encrypted laptop chimed. It was a single email sent to my private Astor Haven address, the one that only 5 people in the world were supposed to have. The sender was anonymous. The address a string of random alphanumeric characters from a secure, encrypted provider based in Switzerland. The subject line was one word: lifeboat. I opened it. There was no body text, no greeting, no explanation, just a single attachment. It was a compressed file named wd_internal_ledger_real.zip. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who this was. There was only one person inside Wexford Dominion who had access to this level of data and the technical know-how to route it to my private server. It was Marcus Sterling, the chief financial officer. Sterling was a survivor. He was a man who wore gray suits and blended into the wallpaper. But he had eyes like a hawk. He had been with Harlan for 15 years. If Harlan was the captain of the Titanic, Sterling was the guy who had already memorized the location of the life vests before the ship even hit the ice. I downloaded the file and unzipped it, the screen filled with spreadsheets, scanned memos, and internal audit logs. I started reading, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers, and within 10 minutes, The blood drained from my face. It was not just bad management. It was fiction. Wexford Dominion had been listing assets that had been sold 3 years ago. They were capitalizing maintenance costs to inflate their net income. They had moved $300 million of bad debt into a shell subsidiary that didn't appear on the consolidated balance sheet. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Harlan wasn't just desperate for the Harbor Line deal because he needed cash. He needed it because without it, the auditors would look too closely. The Harbor Line acquisition would have buried these discrepancies under a mountain of new capital and restructuring costs. I was supposed to be his unsuspecting accomplice. He was going to use my money to fill the holes in his criminal ledger. The dinner insult wasn't just arrogance, it was the arrogance of a con artist who thought his mark was too stupid to check the merchandise. I reached for the conference speakerphone on my desk. I hit the speed dial for the war room at Astor Haven headquarters. "Rivera," I said the moment the line connected. "We are here, Addison." Elias Rook answered. The background noise was louder now. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the team was fully mobilized. "The market is reacting exactly as predicted. Wexford stock is down 12% in pre-market trading. The rumors are turning into panic selling." "Forget the stock price," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I just forwarded a file to your secure terminal. I need the forensic accounting team on it immediately. Right now." "What is it?" Elias asked. "It is a gift from the Wexford CFO," I said. "He knows the ship is going down, and he just handed me the map of the leak. Harlan has been cooking the books. Elias, I am looking at $300 million in hidden debt and asset inflation that borders on fraud." "Jesus," Elias whispered. "If that is true, the company is technically insolvent." "Verify it," I ordered. "And Elias, change the strategy." "Change it to what?" "We are not just walking away," I said. "I want you to prepare a new acquisition strategy. We are not doing a friendly merger. We are not doing a white knight rescue. We are preparing for a distressed asset purchase. When this news hits the public, Wexford Dominion isn't going to be sold. It is going to be salvaged for parts. I want to be the one holding the wrench." "You want to buy it after it crashes," Elias said, catching on instantly. "I want to buy it for 10 cents on the dollar," I corrected him. "And I want to do it while Harlan watches." I stood up and grabbed my blazer. "I am coming in. Clear my schedule. And tell security to be ready. I have a feeling we are going to have visitors." I drove to the Astor Haven headquarters in downtown Miami. Usually, I entered through the private garage and took the executive elevator that bypassed the lobby. I kept a low profile. Most of the junior staff thought I was a high-level consultant. Not the owner. Today, I walked through the front doors. The lobby of Astor Haven Systems was a cathedral of glass and steel. It was modern, intimidating, and silent. The exact opposite of the dark, wood-paneled heaviness of the Wexford estate. The sunlight streamed in through the 3-story windows, reflecting off the white marble floors. It was 8:30 in the morning. I walked past the security desk, nodding to the head guard. He looked surprised to see me using the main entrance, but he straightened up and saluted. "Good morning, Mrs. Rivera." "Good morning, David," I said. "We might have a situation shortly." "We are already having one, ma'am," David said, gesturing toward the waiting area near the elevators. "He has been here for 10 minutes. He is demanding to see the person in charge. He says he won't leave until he speaks to the owner of Project Harbor Line." I stopped. I followed David's gaze. There, pacing back and forth in front of the reception desk, was a man in a disheveled tuxedo. He had clearly not gone home to change. His bow tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a dead snake. His silver hair was wild. His face was a mask of red, sweaty fury. It was Harlan Wexford. He was screaming at the poor receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who looked like she was about to cry. "I don't care what your protocol is," Harlan roared, slamming his hand on the sleek white desk. "You tell your boss that Harlan Wexford is here. You tell him that if he doesn't come down here in 5 minutes, I will sue this entire building into dust. Do you know who I am?" He looked manic. He looked like a king who had woken up to find his castle gone and didn't know how to cope with the open sky. He was confident. That was the most dangerous part. Even in his desperation, he possessed that blinding, delusional confidence of a man who has never been told no. He truly believed that if he just shouted loud enough, the world would rearrange itself to suit him. I turned to David. Is he armed? No, ma'am. We checked. He is just loud. Good, I said. I looked at the receptionist, who caught my eye. I gave her a small nod. She exhaled, relieved to see backup. David, I said quietly, does he have a visitor badge? No, ma'am. He refused to sign in. Let him up, I said, but not to the boardroom. Take him to conference room A, the one with the glass walls. David blinked. The fishbowl, ma'am. It is right in the middle of the main floor. Everyone can see inside. Exactly, I said. He likes an audience. Let's give him one. And who should I say is coming to meet him? David asked. The proxy CEO? I smoothed the lapels of my blazer. I checked my reflection in the glass of the security turnstile. I looked calm. I looked professional. I looked nothing like the woman who had sat silently at dinner the night before. No, I said. Tell him the owner is coming. I walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking on the marble with a sharp, rhythmic precision. Tell him the trash is here to take him out. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, I saw Harlan turning around in the lobby, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the room for an enemy he could intimidate. He was looking for a man in a suit. He was looking for a peer. He had no idea that the executioner was already in the building, and she was wearing the same perfume as the woman he had dismissed over soup. The elevator rose swiftly, the numbers climbing. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 30. I took a deep breath. This was it. The mask was coming off. When the doors opened on the executive floor, the atmosphere was electric. My team was already gathered in the bullpen, their eyes glued to the news feeds. When they saw me, they stopped. Elias Rook stepped forward, holding a tablet. He is in the glass room, Elias said. He is pacing like a caged tiger. He kicked a chair. Let him kick it, I said. Add it to the bill. Addison, Elias said, lowering his voice. Are you sure you want to do this alone? I can go in with you. He is volatile. No, I said. He needs to see me. Just me. If you go in, he will think I am hiding behind a lawyer. He needs to understand that the power structure has inverted. I walked past Elias, down the long corridor lined with modern art and awards for sustainable innovation. At the end of the hall was the central atrium, and in the middle of it stood Conference Room A. It was a stunning piece of architecture, 4 walls of floor-to-ceiling transparent glass. It was designed for transparency, for open collaboration, but right now, it looked like a specimen tank. Harlan Wexford was inside. He was standing with his back to me, looking out at the city skyline, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose of authority that fooled no one. The morning sun was streaming in, illuminating the sweat stains on the back of his tuxedo shirt. I approached the door. I didn't knock. I swiped my keycard. The lock beeped, a cheerful, high-pitched sound that cut through the tension. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It is about time, Harlan barked, spinning around. I have been waiting for... He stopped. The words died in his throat. His mouth hung open, suspended in mid-shout. He blinked, once, twice, as if his brain was refusing to process the visual input. He looked at me. He looked past me, expecting someone else to walk in behind me. When no one did, his confusion deepened into a frown. Addison? He asked. His voice was not angry yet. It was just baffled. What are you doing here? Did Nolan send you? I told him to keep you at home. He took a step forward, his face flushing with a new wave of irritation. This is a place of business. Addison, I am waiting for the chairman of Asterhaven Systems. Get out. Go wait in the car. You are embarrassing me. I didn't move. I stood with my back to the glass door, blocking the exit. I looked him up and down, letting my gaze linger on his disheveled bow tie, his frantic eyes. "Hello, Harlan?" I said. I walked over to the head of the table, the seat of authority. I pulled out the chair, an Aeron chair that cost more than the dining set he had sat at last night, and I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. "You wanted to see the owner of Project Harborline," I said. "I am here." Harlan stared at me. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You? Don't be ridiculous. This isn't a game, little girl. This is a billion-dollar negotiation. Where is the CEO? Where is the man I spoke to on the phone?" "He works for me," I said. "Just like the lawyers work for me. Just like the bank works for me." I reached into my bag and pulled out a file. It wasn't the legal termination notice. It was the printout of the email from his CFO. I slid it across the glass table. It stopped perfectly in front of him. "You are not waiting for a man. Harlan," I said, my voice dropping to that same dangerous calm I had used in the car. "You are waiting for the person who holds your debt. And unfortunately for you, she remembers exactly what you said about trash getting fed with the staff." Harlan looked at the file. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, I saw the dawn of true paralyzing fear in his eyes. "Sit down, Harlan," I said. "We have a lot to talk about, and I suggest you get comfortable. It is going to be a very long morning." The sun inside conference room A was violent. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and the architects of Asterhaven Systems had designed this room to catch the full force of the eastern light. It flooded through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, bouncing off the polished white table and creating a blinding, sterile brightness that stripped away shadows. There was nowhere to hide in here. Every pore, every bead of sweat, every twitch of a nervous muscle was magnified. Harlan Wexford stood in the center of it, squinting. He was holding his hand up to shield his eyes from the glare, disoriented by the sheer exposure. He looked like a specimen in a jar. Outside the glass, the Asterhaven employees walked past with their tablets and coffees, glancing in as they worked. They were not staring, but Harlan felt stared at. He felt the weight of 100 eyes, and for a man who was used to controlling the gaze of a room, this fishbowl was a torture chamber. He had not looked at the wall behind the head of the table. If he had, he would have seen the massive, brushed steel logo of Asterhaven Systems. He would have seen the list of board members etched into the frosted glass panel near the door. He would have seen my name, but he did not look. He only saw me, and to him, I was still just the inconvenience from dinner. I walked further into the room. I was alone. I had told Elias and the legal team to stay outside. I carried nothing but a single but thin manila envelope, no briefcase, no laptop, no army of attorneys to validate my importance. Harlan's eyes adjusted to the light, and when they landed on me, his confusion hardened into immediate, reflex anger. He straightened his spine, trying to summon the ghost of the authority he had wielded the night before. "Addison," he barked. It was a command, not a greeting. "I told you to wait in the car. What is wrong with you? Can you not follow a simple instruction?" He gestured wildly at the glass walls, at the busy office beyond them. "Look at this place," he shouted, his voice vibrating against the hard surfaces. "This is a serious company. Addison, I am here to meet the chairman. I am here to save your husband's inheritance. I do not have time to babysit you while you play office. Get out." I did not stop walking. I moved with a slow, hydraulic inevitability. I walked past him. I walked past the flank of the long table where the subordinates usually sat. I walked all the way to the head of the table, the seat that faced the door, the seat that commanded the room. I pulled the chair out. It was heavy, expensive leather. I sat down, crossed my legs, and rested my hands on the cool white surface of the table. "You are right. Harlan," I said. My voice was low, but in the acoustic perfection of the glass room, it struck him like a physical blow. "This is a serious company." Harlan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process the image of me sitting in the chair he believed belonged to his savior. "Exactly," I said. The word hung in the air. Harlan blinked. He looked at me, sitting comfortably at the head of the billion-dollar table. Then, he looked at the empty chairs around us. Then, finally, his eyes drifted to the wall behind me. He saw the logo, Asterhaven Systems. He looked down at the desk in front of me. There was no nameplate, but there was a digital console built into the surface. It was active. It displayed my biometric login ID. A. Rivera, majority shareholder/chair. He looked back at me. The realization did not happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing crumble. I watched the blood drain from his face in stages. First, the flush of anger vanished, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. Then, his eyes widened, losing their focus as his brain frantically tried to rewrite the last 3 years of history. He was replaying every interaction we had ever heard. He was remembering every time he had interrupted me. He was remembering every time he had ignored my advice on the economy. He was remembering last night. He looked at me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a fatal error he had made in a spreadsheet. "No," he whispered. It was a dry, cracking sound. "No, that is not possible." "Sit down, Harlan," I said. This time, he did not argue. His knees seemed to give way, and he collapsed into the chair opposite me. The sun was still hitting him in the face, forcing him to squint, while I sat in the cool shadow of the logo. "You," he stammered. "Project Harborline. It is—" "You?" "It is me," I confirmed. I kept my face completely neutral. I did not smile. I did not frown. I gave him nothing. "I am the capital. I am the strategy. And as of 2 o'clock this morning, I am the reason your stock is currently trading at a 3-year low." Harlan gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. "You killed the deal. You sent that email." "I did." "Why?" he asked. The question was genuine. He truly did not understand. In his world, business was math, and feelings were irrelevant. "We were days away. It was a good deal. It was profitable for you. Why would you burn it down?" I leaned forward slightly. "Trash doesn't sit at the table. Harlan, it gets fed wherever the staff eats." He flinched. "You said that," I continued, my voice flat and unyielding. "You said it with a smile. You said it while holding a glass of wine that cost more than my first car. You thought it was witty. You thought it was a lesson on class. Addison, that was a dinner party," he sputtered, waving a hand dismissively. "That was social. This is business. You cannot mix the two. You have a duty to your shareholders to make rational decisions." "I am the shareholder," I said. And I made a rational decision. I decided that a CEO who lacks the basic emotional intelligence to treat his family with dignity lacks the discipline to run a billion-dollar subsidiary. It is not personal. Harlan, it is a risk assessment. You are a liability. "I am a liability?" He laughed, but it was a high, hysterical sound. "I built Wexford Dominion from the ground up. I am the only reason this industry exists in Florida." "You built it," I agreed. "And now you are burying it." I watched him struggle for a foothold. He realized that intimidation would not work. He realized that logic would not work because he had already violated the logic of the deal. So he did what men like him always do when they are cornered. He reached for the moral high ground he had never occupied before. He leaned across the table, his face softening into a mask of paternal concern. It was a grotesque performance. "Addison, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Forget about me. Forget about the insult. Think about the people. We have 4,000 employees, families, people with mortgages. If this company fails, they lose everything. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the woman who fired 4,000 people because her feelings were hurt?" He paused, waiting for the guilt to hit me. When I didn't blink, he played his ace. "Think about Nolan," he said. He is your husband. This company is his birthright. It is his identity. If you destroy it, you destroy him. Is that how you love him? By humiliating his father and burning his legacy? I stared at him. I looked at the sweat glistening on his upper lip. I looked at the desperate, manipulative gleam in his eyes. Don't, I said. Don't what? Don't use people as props, I said. You do not care about those 4,000 employees. You raided their pension fund 3 years ago to pay for the expansion in Texas. I saw the audit. Harlan froze. And do not speak to me about Nolan, I said, my voice turning icy. You have spent his entire life making him feel small, so you could feel big. You don't want to save the company for him. You want to save it for your own vanity. Harlan opened his mouth to deny it, to shout, to bluster. I reached for the manila envelope I had brought with me. I slid it across the white table. It made a dry, rasping sound, shh, that seemed to echo in the silence. It stopped right in front of his hands. What is this? He asked, staring at it like it was a bomb. Open it, I said. He hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers and lifted the flap. He pulled out the stack of papers. I watched his eyes scan the top page. It was a summary of the offshore debt restructuring he had authorized without board approval. It was the smoking gun of his financial engineering. Where did you get this? He whispered. He looked up at me, terrified. This is internal. This is protected. It was sent to me this morning, I said, by someone who wants to make sure they have a seat on the lifeboat when the ship goes down. Who? Harlan demanded. Who betrayed me? Does it matter? I asked. The numbers are real. Harlan, you are hiding $300 million in bad debt. You are capitalizing operating expenses. You are presenting a fictional balance sheet to the bank. I leaned back in my chair. If I take this to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you do not just lose the company, I said casually. You go to federal prison, and given your age, you will die there. Harlan dropped the papers. They scattered across the table, a messy sprawl of evidence in the bright sunlight. He slumped back in his chair. Defeated, the fight had gone out of him. He looked old. He looked like a man who had suddenly realized that the gravity he had defied for 40 years had finally caught up with him. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no arrogance. There was only begging. What do you want? He asked. His voice was barely audible. Do you want a seat on the board? Is that it? I can give you a seat. I can give you 2. We can restructure the governance. You can have veto power. I looked at him with genuine pity. He still thought in increments. He still thought he could negotiate a treaty. I don't want a seat. Harlan, I said. I stood up. I towered over him as he sat slumped in the chair. I want the table. Harlan stared up at me, his mouth slightly open. I am giving you 48 hours, I said. 48 hours for what? He asked desperately. To resign? To find a buyer? What are the terms? I didn't answer. I didn't give him a checklist. I didn't give him a target to aim at. I knew that the most terrifying thing I could give a man like Harlan Wexford was uncertainty. 48 hours, I repeated. Tick-tock. Harlan? I turned around and walked toward the door. Addison, he called out after me, panic rising in his voice again. You can't just leave me like this. What happens in 48 hours? I paused at the glass door. I looked back at him one last time. He was sitting alone in the fishbowl, surrounded by the evidence of his own corruption, blinded by the sun, terrified of the silence. That depends entirely on you, I said. I stepped out of the room and let the door click shut behind me. I didn't look back as I walked down the hallway. I could feel his eyes on my back, burning with fear. I knew he wouldn't leave that room for a long time. I knew he would sit there, staring at the papers, his imagination inventing scenarios far worse than anything I could have written down in a contract. I had trapped him in a glass box with his own demons, and I had locked the door. Harlan Wexford did not go home to pray. He did not go home to reflect on his moral failings or to draft an apology letter. A man like Harlan does not believe in penitence. He believes in ammunition. If you back a tiger into a corner, it does not negotiate. It swipes. I had given him 48 hours to contemplate his demise, but he spent the first 4 of them coordinating a counterstrike that was as dirty as it was predictable. I was sitting in my living room, the one with the beige curtains that Nolan had picked out because he thought they were calming, when the first grenade landed. It wasn't a subpoena. It was a push notification from a gossip column that masqueraded as financial news. The headline was bold, nasty, and designed to bleed. The real reason the Wexford deal died. A spurned wife's billion-dollar tantrum. I tapped the screen. The article was a masterpiece of fiction. It painted Harlan as a benevolent patriarch struggling to save an American legacy, and me as the instable, manipulative daughter-in-law who had sabotaged a critical infrastructure project because I felt socially slighted. It cited anonymous sources close to the family, which meant Harlan himself, claiming that I had demanded a seat on the board and, when refused, had used my husband's influence to poison the deal. They were calling me a gold digger. They were calling me a saboteur. They were stripping away my business acumen and reducing me to a hysterical woman who broke the china because she didn't get her way. Then came the television spot. I watched the local business news at noon. Harlan had not gone on camera himself. That would look desperate. Instead, he had shoved Nolan in front of the firing squad. My husband stood on the steps of the Wexford headquarters, looking pale and hollowed out. A dozen microphones were thrust into his face. He looked like a hostage reading a ransom note. "My father and I are committed to the future of this company," Nolan said, his voice devoid of conviction. "We are currently dealing with some external interference that has complicated the negotiation process. We ask the shareholders to remain patient. The Wexford family stands united. The Wexford family stands united." I turned off the television. The screen went black, but the image of Nolan's dead eyes burned into my retinas. He had made his choice. He had allowed his father to use him as a shield. He had gone out there and lied to the world to protect the man who had called his wife trash. My phone started blowing up. Friends, or people who pretended to be friends, texting to ask if I was okay, which was code for "tell me the gossip." I did not reply. I did not go on social media to defend myself. I did not issue a tearful denial. Harlan wanted a catfight. He wanted me to get down in the mud with him, screaming about how he was mean to me, because in a screaming match, the louder voice wins, and Harlan was very loud, but I was not going to scream. I was going to whisper. I picked up the secure line to Elias Rook. "The narrative is getting out of control," Elias said, his voice tight. "The stock is stabilizing slightly because investors think this is just a family squabble that can be fixed. They think you are the problem. Addison, Harlan is spinning this as a personal vendetta. Let him spin," I said calmly. "Gravity works one way. Elias, what goes up must come down." "We need a statement," Elias urged. "We need to deny the allegations." "No," I said. "Denials look guilty. We are not going to deny anything. We are going to provide context. Do we still have the time-stamped logs of their request to accelerate the signing?" "Yes." "And the risk assessment report from the due diligence phase?" "Yes." "Leak them," I ordered. Not to the gossip columns. Send them to the senior editor at the Financial Times, and release a short, official statement from Project Harborline. Do not mention my name. Do not mention the dinner. What should the statement say? Say this: Project Harborline terminated the letter of intent due to documented evidence of leadership coercing financial timelines in violation of standard governance protocols. The decision was based on data, not emotion. "That is dry," Elias said. "It is supposed to be," I replied. "Harlan is telling a soap opera. We are reading a court transcript. Let the investors decide which one sounds like a safe place for their money." By 2:00 in the afternoon, the counter-narrative hit the wire. It wasn't flashy. It was boring. It was a series of PDF documents showing that Harlan Wexford had tried to bypass a safety audit to get the cash 3 days early. It showed the emails where he threatened the bank. It showed the desperate timeline. The market stopped laughing at the angry wife story and started asking the real question. If they were so desperate to sign on Monday morning that they threatened the bank, what are they hiding? The stock price, which had recovered slightly, fell off a cliff. It dropped another 6% in an hour. Harlan's phone was probably melting in his hand. He had tried to make this about gender, about family, about me. I had just made it about math, and the math was ugly. At 4 o'clock, my secure email chimed again. It was Marcus Sterling, the Wexford CFO, meeting, 6 p.m., the cargo hold, come alone. The cargo hold was a dive bar near the port, the kind of place where dock workers went to drink away their back pain and tourists never ventured. It was dark, smelled of diesel and fried fish, and was the last place anyone would look for two executives discussing the fate of an empire. I arrived at 5:55. I wore jeans and a nondescript jacket, my hair pulled back. I sat in a booth at the back, facing the door. Marcus Sterling walked in right on time. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His gray suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened. He ordered a club soda and slid into the booth opposite me. "You are destroying him," Marcus said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "He destroyed himself." "Marcus," I said, "I am just the gravity." "He is raging," Marcus said, staring at his drink. "He is firing people randomly. He fired the head of PR an hour ago because the smear campaign didn't stop the stock drop. He is talking about liquidating the pension fund to buy back shares." "He can't do that," I said. "That is illegal." "He doesn't care," Marcus said. "He is cornered. He thinks he can fix it if he just has enough cash to survive the week. He thinks you will crack. He thinks Nolan will convince you to come back to the table." "Nolan has no voice at the table," I said coldly. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked old, the edges slightly worn. "I didn't give you everything in the zip file this morning," Marcus said. "I held one thing back. Insurance." "Insurance for whom?" "For me," Marcus said. "If I give you this, I want a guarantee. When you take over, and I know you're going to take over, I want immunity. I want a clean exit package, and I want my name kept out of the fraud investigation." I looked at him. He was a rat leaving a sinking ship, but rats were useful because they knew where the holes were. "If the information is good," I said, "you will walk away clean. You have my word." Marcus slid the paper across the sticky table. I unfolded it. It was a loan agreement, but not a corporate loan. It was a personal loan agreement from 5 years ago, taken out by Harlan Wexford to cover a massive gambling debt in Macau that he had tried to hide from the board. The amount was $50 million. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the collateral clause. To secure the loan, Harlan had not pledged shares. He had pledged a personal guarantee. He had signed a clause stating that if the debt was not serviced within 30 days of a margin call, the lender had the right to seize his personal assets, his estate, his cars, his art collection, and his voting shares in Wexford Dominion. "Who holds this note?" I asked, my finger tracing the signature. "A private credit fund in the Cayman Islands," Marcus said. "They don't care about the company. They just want the interest payments. Harlan pays them religiously every month from a shell account. But here is the kicker. The loan has a change of control clause if the company stock drops below a certain threshold. The lender can demand full repayment immediately." I looked up at Marcus. "And the stock is currently 5% below the threshold." Marcus smiled. It was a grim, tight smile. "Technically, the loan is in default right now. But the lender doesn't know yet. They haven't checked the ticker." "But if someone were to buy this debt from the lender," I said, the plan forming instantly in my mind. "If someone were to acquire the note, then that person could call the loan immediately," Marcus finished. And if Harlan can't pay $50 million in cash, which he can't, because he is cash poor, that person can seize his personal voting shares. They wouldn't need to buy the company. They would just take his keys. I sat back. It was elegant. It was brutal. It was perfect. The lender, I said. Give me the contact. It is all in the file, Marcus said. I didn't finish my drink. I stood up, tucking the document into my jacket. Go home, Marcus. Keep your head down. When the dust settles, I will send a car for you. I walked out of the bar and into the humid evening air. I called Elias before I even reached my car. Elias, I said, wake up the partners at North Cove Capital Partners. North Cove? Elias asked. That is the dormant shell company we used for the real estate acquisition in Nevada. It has 0 assets. Transfer $55 million into North Cove immediately, I said. I am emailing you a contact for a private credit fund in the Caymans. North Cove is going to make them an offer to buy a distressed note tonight. Offer them 105 cents on the dollar. Make them say yes before they realize what they are selling. What are we buying? Elias asked. We are buying Harlan Wexford, I said. Not his company, him. We are buying the man himself. By 10 o'clock that night, the deal was done. North Cove Capital Partners, a faceless entity that existed only on paper, was now the legal owner of Harlan Wexford's personal debt. I sat in my study, holding the digital certificate of ownership. Harlan thought he was fighting a PR war. He thought he was fighting for public opinion. He was busy drafting speeches and bullying his son. He had no idea that while he was screaming at the television, I had quietly walked into his bank vault and changed the locks. He was standing on a glass floor. Convinced he was a giant. He didn't know I was standing in the basement with a sledgehammer. I heard the front door open. It was late. The house was dark. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, dragging footsteps. Nolan stood in the doorway of the study. He looked wrecked. His tie was gone. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He smelled of scotch and exhaustion. He looked at me sitting there, bathed in the blue light of the monitors. Are you happy? He asked. His voice was raspy. I saw the stock price. I saw the leak about the audit. He is having a breakdown. Addison, he is talking about conspiracies. He is terrified. He should be, I said. Nolan walked into the room. He looked around at the screens, at the data, at the command center I had built. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. Are you really doing this? He asked. Are you really going to burn everything down just because he hurt your feelings? I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I walked around the desk until I was standing 2 feet from him. Hurt my feelings? I repeated. Is that what you think this is? You think I am doing this because I'm sad? He called you a name, Nolan said, pleading. I know it was awful. I know. But this is nuclear war. You are destroying his life's work. You are destroying my heritage. Your heritage is a lie. Nolan, I said. Your father is a fraud. He has been cooking the books for 3 years. He has stolen from his employees. He has lied to the banks, and he has treated you like a servant in your own life. He is my father, Nolan shouted. It was the first time he had raised his voice at me. You don't understand that bond. You don't understand loyalty. I understand loyalty perfectly, I said. Loyalty is standing up for your wife when she is humiliated. Loyalty is telling the truth. Loyalty is not enabling a tyrant just because you share his last name. I looked him in the eye. You asked if I'm doing this because he hurt my feelings. No. Nolan, I am doing this because he called me trash. And do you know what you do with trash? Nolan stared at me, trembling. You take it out, I said. He thinks he is safe. I continued, stepping closer. He thinks he can bully me into submission. But he forgot one thing. He forgot to check who was holding the pen. And right now, I own him. I own his debt. I own his house. I own the chair he sits in. What are you talking about? Nolan whispered. I bought his debt, Nolan, through a shell company, tomorrow morning. I can snap my fingers and seize everything he has. Nolan looked at me with horror. You wouldn't try me, I said. I turned back to the desk. I am giving you a choice, Nolan. And this is the last time I will ever give you a choice. I pointed to the door. You can walk out that door, go back to that mansion, and stand next to your father while he sinks. You can be the loyal son who goes down with the ship. You can be his shadow for the rest of your life. I pointed to the floor beside me. Or you can stand here, with me. You can be a man. You can be my partner. You can help me build something that isn't made of lies and fear. Nolan looked at the door. Then he looked at me. The silence in the room was deafening. It stretched for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. He will hate me, Nolan whispered. If I don't go back, he will never forgive me. He doesn't love you, Nolan, I said softly. He owns you. There is a difference. Addison. Choose, I said. Right now. Because tomorrow morning, the war ends, and I need to know if I am sleeping next to a husband or a hostage. Nolan closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out and rolled down his cheek. He took a breath, a shaky, terrified breath. And then, he opened his eyes. Sunday morning broke over Palm Crest with the kind of gray, stifling humidity that usually precedes a hurricane. The air was heavy, the sky a bruised purple. It was the perfect weather for an execution. I sat in my command center in the study, a mug of cold coffee untouched on the desk, on the main screen. I had a secure, high-definition video feed linked directly into the Wexford Dominion boardroom. Marcus Sterling, my mole and their CFO, had accidentally left his laptop camera active on the credenza, angled perfectly to capture the entire long mahogany table. I wasn't physically in the room. I didn't need to be. Being a giant, silent face on a screen or an invisible observer is often more terrifying than a physical presence. Today, I was the invisible hand. The boardroom was in chaos. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The emergency meeting had been called for 8. 12 men and 1 woman sat around the table, looking like passengers on a plane that had just lost both engines. They were arguing, shouting, checking their phones every 30 seconds as the stock futures continued to bleed red. At the head of the table, Harlan Wexford looked manic. He was wearing a fresh suit, but it hung loosely on him, as if he had shrunk overnight. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for loyalty and finding only panic. Order, Harlan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I called this meeting to discuss a defense strategy, not to listen to you whine like children. We are not whining, Harlan, said George Pendergast, a board member who had been with the company for 20 years. We are looking at insolvency. The bank just called. They are freezing the credit lines at noon if we don't have a liquidity plan. We need capital, and we need it 3 hours ago. We have capital, Harlan lied, his voice cracking. I am talking to investors. I have calls out to Dubai. I have calls out to London. You have nothing, George shot back. We know the Harbor Line deal is dead. We know about the audit leaks. The market knows about the debt. We are radioactive. Harlan, nobody's going to touch us. It is that woman, Harlan hissed, pointing a shaking finger at the empty air, as if I were standing there. It is that outsider. She is poisoning the well. She is spreading lies to drive the price down so she can humiliate us. We cannot let a vindictive housewife dictate the fate of this company. I watched from my screen, my face impassive. Vindictive housewife. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was about emotions. I typed a command into my terminal. Send proposal. In the boardroom. Every tablet and monitor on the table simultaneously lit up. A single document appeared on every screen. Acquisition proposal. Asterhaven Systems. The room went silent. The shouting stopped. The only sound was the tapping of fingers on glass as the board members opened the file. "What is this?" someone whispered. "It is an offer," Marcus Sterling said from the corner of the room. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried. "It just arrived from the Astor Haven legal team. It is a formal binding offer to acquire 100% of Wexford Dominion." Harlan snatched a tablet from the table. He stared at it, his eyes bulging. "She wants to buy us?" he sputtered. "After she killed the deal? She wants to buy us?" "Look at the price." "Harlan," George Pendergast said. He was scrolling through the document, his eyebrows rising. 70 cents on the dollar. It is low. Yes, but it is not a liquidation price. It is a rescue price. It is an insult, Harlan roared. She is trying to steal my company for pennies. Read the terms. Harlan, another board member, a woman named Elaine, said. Her voice was trembling with relief. Look at Section 4, Employee Retention. She is guaranteeing the jobs of the entire operational workforce for 24 months. She is fully funding the pension deficit. She is promising to keep the headquarters in Florida. She is lying, Harlan screamed. She will strip it for parts. And Section 5, Elaine continued, ignoring him. Strategic realignment. She has a plan to transition our grid to their renewable platform within 3 years. Harlan, this isn't a raid. This is a lifeline. If we sign this, we survive. The name survives. The employees survive. I watched the faces around the table shift. 10 minutes ago, they were looking at bankruptcy. They were looking at lawsuits, lost reputations, and ruined retirements. Now, they were looking at a lifeboat. It wasn't a luxury yacht, but it would keep them from drowning. Harlan saw the shift too. He saw the hope in their eyes, and it terrified him. He realized that the only thing standing between them and safety was him. You cannot be serious, Harlan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are not actually considering selling to her? To my son's wife? She is mocking us. She is laughing at us. We don't care if she is laughing. Harlan, George said, slamming the tablet down. We care that the check clears, and Astor Haven checks clear. I will veto it, Harlan declared. He stood up, trying to physically dominate the room. I hold the chairman's voting block. I will never sign this company over to that woman. I would rather see it burn. That is the problem. Harlan, I said to the empty room in my house, you are holding a match, and everyone else is holding a fire extinguisher. It was time to apply the pressure. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to Marcus Sterling. Deploy the leverage on Pendergast. In the boardroom. Marcus looked at his phone. He cleared his throat. There is one other thing, Marcus said. He looked directly at George Pendergast. The proposal has a contingency attached to the immediate liquidity injection. Astor Haven has flagged some irregularities in the vendor contracts for the North Dakota expansion. George Pendergast froze. His face went pale. Specifically, Marcus continued, his voice devoid of judgment. Contracts awarded to a logistics firm owned by a shell company registered to Mr. Pendergast's brother-in-law. The proposal states that if the deal is signed today, Astor Haven will treat those irregularities as legacy administrative errors and seal the files during the transition. If the deal is not signed, they are legally obligated to report them to the DOJ as part of the audit. The room was deadly silent. I had found the dirt on Pendergast 2 days ago. It was a classic kickback scheme, sloppy and easy to trace. Harlan had allowed it because it bought him Pendergast's loyalty. Now, I was using that same loyalty to break him. George Pendergast looked at Harlan. Then he looked at the tablet. He looked at his own future, prison or a quiet retirement. I move to vote, Pendergast said. His voice was hoarse. George, Harlan shouted, betrayed. You can't do this. I move to accept the Astor Haven proposal, Pendergast repeated, louder this time. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. This is the best offer on the table. It is the only offer. Seconded, Elaine said immediately. Traitors! Harlan screamed. He was losing control completely. He looked wild, cornered. I made you. All of you. I gave you these seats. And this is how you repay me? By selling me out to a girl?" He spun around, looking for an ally. He found the only person in the room who hadn't spoken yet. Nolan. My husband was sitting at the far end of the table, near the door. He was wearing a dark blue suit, the one I had bought him for our anniversary. He had been silent for the entire meeting, his hands clasped on the table, watching the chaos unfold with a strange, detached calm. Harlan marched down the length of the table toward him. He loomed over his son, using his physical size to intimidate, just as he had done for 38 years. "Nolan," Harlan commanded, "talk sense into them. You are my son. You are a Wexford. Tell them we are not selling. Tell them to reject this garbage." Nolan looked up at his father. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "And you," Harlan continued, lowering his voice to a hiss, "you call your wife, right now. You tell her to withdraw this offer and come to the table with an apology. You tell her that if she doesn't stop this, you are leaving her. You threaten her. Nolan, do whatever you have to do. Use your marriage. Use the leverage." I held my breath. I gripped the edge of my desk. This was it. This was the moment. Nolan stood up. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't the boy who had stared at his soup. He was the man who had walked into my study last night and chosen a side. "I can't do that." "Dad," Nolan said. "What do you mean, you can't?" Harlan spat. "She is your wife. You control her." "I don't control her," Nolan said quietly. "Nobody controls her. That is why she is winning." "You are weak," Harlan sneered. "Just like your mother. You would let a woman castrate you in public rather than stand up like a man." Nolan looked around the room. He looked at the board members who were watching him with pity. He looked at the screen where the proposal glowed. "This company is dying." "Dad," Nolan said, "it is rotting from the inside because you treated it like a kingdom instead of a business. You treated people like subjects. You treated Addison like trash." "She is trash," Harlan shouted. "She is the only person in this world who is trying to save the employees you abandoned." Nolan said. His voice rose, filling the room. "She is offering to save the pension fund. She is offering to save the jobs. She is offering to clean up the mess you made." "I don't care about the mess," Harlan yelled. "I care about the name. I care about my company." Nolan looked his father dead in the eye. "If the company needs my wife to live," Nolan said, "maybe you are the one who shouldn't be leading it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a cord being cut. Harlan stood there, mouth open, unable to comprehend the defiance. His own son, his own creation, had just delivered the eulogy for his leadership. Before Harlan could respond, the door to the boardroom opened. An assistant rushed in, looking terrified. "Mr. Wexford," she stammered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is on the news. It is everywhere." "What is?" Harlan snapped. "The buyer," she said. "Someone leaked the details of the proposal. Bloomberg just ran a headline. Wexford daughter-in-law launches rescue bid for crumbling empire." She held up her tablet. The headline was massive, and below it, the subheadline read, "Market rallies on news of competent leadership taking over Wexford Dominion." The stock, George Pendergast checked his phone. "My God, it is up. It is up 8% in the last 5 minutes. "The market likes her," Elaine whispered. "They trust her more than they trust us." Harlan looked at the screen. He looked at the green arrows pointing up. The world was cheering for his defeat. The market wasn't mourning his loss. It was celebrating his removal. I sat in my study, watching Harlan's face crumble. The realization hit him like a physical weight. The game was over. The rules had changed. He wasn't fighting a hostile takeover anymore. He was fighting a liberation movement. I picked up my phone and called my lead attorney, Elias Rook. "The board is ready to fold," I said. "Send the final term sheet now." "Sending it," Elias said. "Standard closing conditions?" "No," I said. Add the special condition we discussed. The Harlan clause. Are you sure? Elias asked. It is harsh. Addison, it is humiliating. It is necessary, I said. Send it. In the boardroom. The tablets chimed again. Updated terms received. George Pendergast opened the file. He read it, and his eyes widened. He looked up at Harlan, then down at the table. What is it? Harlan demanded. What does she want now? My house? My car? No, Harlan, George said softly. She wants you. Read it, Harlan ordered. George cleared his throat. Condition 7. Immediate resignation of Harlan Wexford as chairman and CEO effective upon signature. No severance package, no golden parachute, no consulting agreement, no honorary title, and… George paused, flinching. And what? And a permanent ban from entering any Wexford Dominion property or contacting any employee, past or present, a complete and total excision. Harlan staggered back as if he had been shot. She can't do that. I built this. I am Wexford Dominion. Not anymore, Nolan said. Nolan picked up the tablet. He tapped the screen. I vote yes, Nolan said. Nolan! Harlan gasped. I vote yes, George Pendergast said. I vote yes, Elaine said. One by one. The hands went up. The voices joined the chorus. It wasn't a vote. It was a mutiny. Harlan stood alone at the head of the table, surrounded by the people he had bullied for decades, watching them sign his death warrant. I leaned back in my chair at home. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this. It was just business. It was just the inevitable result of a man who thought he was a god running into a woman who knew she was the architect. The vote passed unanimously. Harlan Wexford was fired, and the person who signed the termination papers was the trash he had tried to throw away. The adrenaline of the board meeting had faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and brittle. I was back in our house, the one Harlan called a starter home. Standing in the kitchen with a glass of water I had forgotten to drink. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the countertops. The front door opened. I did not turn around immediately. I listened to the footsteps, for 10 years. I had known Nolan's walk. It had always been light, hesitant, the walk of a man who was perpetually worried he might disturb the air around him. But tonight, the footsteps were different. They were slower, heavier, but they were solid. They sounded like boots on gravel, not slippers on carpet. Nolan walked into the kitchen. He had taken off his suit jacket. His tie was gone. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, exposing his throat. He looked exhausted. But it was the exhaustion of a man who had just run a marathon, not a man who had been beaten up in an alley. He stopped at the island, placing a single sheet of paper on the granite. I need you to read this, he said. His voice was raspy. I put down my glass. I looked at him, searching his face for the panic I was used to seeing. It wasn't there. There was fear. Yes, but it was a quiet, controlled fear. I looked down at the paper. It was printed on plain white paper, not the Wexford Dominion letterhead. To the Board of Directors. Effective immediately. I, Nolan Wexford, resign from my position as Vice President of Operations and surrender my seat on the board. I relinquish all executive authority and sever my employment with Wexford Dominion. I read it twice. Then I looked up at him. You resigned, I said. The deal isn't signed yet. Nolan, you didn't have to do this. The acquisition terms protect the staff. They would have protected you. I know, Nolan said. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. That is why I did it. I couldn't let you protect me. Addison. If I stayed, if I let you buy the company while I was still sitting in that chair, I would just be trading one owner for another. I would go from being Harlan's son to being Addison's husband. I would still be a shadow. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly, but he clenched them into fists until they stopped. I have been a coward, he said. The words came out fast, as if he needed to expel them before he lost his nerve. For 3 years, I have watched him cut you down, small cuts, comments about your background, comments about your clothes, and every time he did it, I froze. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself he was just old. He was just stressed. He didn't mean it. He looked up at me, his eyes wet but clear. But that was a lie. I didn't freeze because I wanted peace. I froze because I was terrified of him. I have been terrified of him since I was 6 years old. I stayed silent. I knew Harlan was a bully, but I had always assumed Nolan's submission was a personality trait, a natural lack of spine. I hadn't considered it a survival mechanism. "You don't know about my mother," Nolan said softly. "I know she died when you were in college." I said, "I know it was a car accident." "I don't mean how she died," Nolan said. "I mean how she lived, and how she left." He walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening street. "She didn't just leave the company. Addison, she was erased. When I was 12, she tried to stand up to him. She wanted to diversify the portfolio, move away from coal. She had a voice. She was smart, smarter than him." Nolan turned back to me. The memory was clearly painful, etched into his face. "Harlan didn't just fire her. He dismantled her. He started a whisper campaign in the club. He questioned her mental health. He froze her assets. He used the lawyers to bury her in so much paperwork she couldn't breathe. He made her look crazy to her own friends. By the time he was done, she wasn't just out of the company. She was a ghost in her own house. She stopped speaking. She stopped fighting. She just faded." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had experienced Harlan's cruelty for 3 years, but I was an adult with my own money and my own company. I was a fortress. Nolan's mother had been a wife, dependent and vulnerable. "I watched it happen," Nolan whispered. "I was 12, and I learned the lesson. If you fight Harlan Wexford, you don't just lose the argument. You lose your reality. You lose your mind. So I promised myself I would never fight him. I would just be quiet. I would be the good soldier. I thought if I made myself small enough, he couldn't hit me." He took a step toward me. "But tonight, when he called you trash," Nolan swallowed hard. "I saw him looking at you the way he used to look at her. He wasn't just insulting you, he was preparing to erase you. And I realized that if I stayed silent this time, I wasn't just a coward. I was an accomplice." He pointed to the resignation letter on the counter. "I am done. Addison, I am not his son anymore. I am not his VP. I am unemployed. I have no trust fund, no salary, and no inheritance. He is going to cut me off the second he finds out. I am walking away with nothing but the clothes on my back." He looked at me with a desperate, raw honesty. "But I chose you. I didn't choose you because you are rich. I didn't choose you because you are winning. I chose you because you are the first person in my life who told him no. And I want to be standing next to the person who says no." I looked at the resignation letter again. It was a piece of paper, but it was also a severed limb. Nolan had just cut off his safety net. He had spent 38 years being groomed for a throne, and he had just set the throne on fire because he refused to sit on it without me. "You know what this means," I said, my voice steady. "If you walk away, you really walk away. There is no going back. Harlan will never forgive this. He will view this as a betrayal worse than death." "I know," Nolan said. "And I'm still going to buy the company," I added. "I am going to strip his name off the building. I am going to fire his friends. I am going to dismantle his legacy. Are you ready to watch that?" "I will help you hold the sledgehammer," Nolan said. Just then, the phone in Nolan's pocket began to ring. It was a harsh, jarring sound in the quiet kitchen. We both looked at it. We both knew who it was. Nolan pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with the word, "Father." Nolan looked at me. I nodded. "Answer it." He swiped the screen and put it on speaker. He placed it on the granite counter between us, like a bomb we were both observing. "You ungrateful, spineless little traitor." Harlan's voice exploded from the speaker. distorted by rage. He was screaming so loud the microphone was clipping. "I just got an email from HR. Resignation? Are you insane? Have you lost your mind?" Nolan leaned over the phone. "Hello, Dad?" "Don't you hello, Dad me?" Harlan roared. "You withdraw that letter immediately, do you hear me? You call them back and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were drunk. Tell them your wife hacked your email. I don't care what you tell them. But you fix this." "It wasn't a mistake," Nolan said calmly. "I quit." "You can't quit," Harlan screamed. "You are my son. You are the heir. If you walk away now, you get nothing. Do you understand? I will write you out of the will tonight. I will cut off your cards. I will make sure you never work in this town again. You will be destitute." "I don't care about the money," Nolan said. "Oh, you don't care about the money?" Harlan laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You think you can live on love? You think that woman is going to support you? She is playing you. Nolan, she is using you to get to me. Once she has the company, she will dump you like the garbage she is. She is a snake. She is a low-class, gold-digging whore who—" Nolan moved. It was a blur of motion. He didn't just lean toward the phone. He snatched it off the counter. He gripped it so hard I thought the screen would crack. "Saw," Nolan said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. It was deep, guttural, and vibrating with a rage I had never heard from him. Harlan stopped mid-sentence, stunned by the interruption. "Don't you ever," Nolan said, his voice shaking with intensity, "speak about my wife like that again." Silence. Dead silence on the other end of the line. Harlan Wexford had never been spoken to like that by his son. Not once. "She is not a snake," Nolan continued, his voice rising, gaining strength with every word. "She is the only person who saw the truth about you. You are not a king. Dad, you are just a sad, angry old man with a checkbook. And now you don't even have the checkbook. Nolan, I warn you." Harlan started, his voice lower, threatening. "No, I warn you." Nolan cut him off. "I am done. I am done being your prop. I am done being your excuse. I am resigning from the company, and I am resigning from being your victim. Do not call this number again. Do not come to my house. If you want to speak to us, call Addison's lawyers, because from now on, that is the only way you get to reach us." "You will regret this," Harlan hissed. "You will come crawling back." "I would rather starve," Nolan said. He tapped the red button. The call ended. Nolan stood there, breathing heavily, the phone still clutched in his hand. He stared at the black screen as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. He looked like a man who had just jumped off a cliff and was surprised to find he could fly. He slowly set the phone down on the counter. He looked up at me. His face was pale, but his eyes were bright. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked around the island. I stood in front of him. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. This wasn't a moment for softness. It was a moment for respect. I reached out and took his hands. They were cold. "You just lost $50 million in inheritance," I said. "I gained my self-respect," Nolan replied. "It was a bargain." I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around him. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the way you hug a soldier who just made it back to the trench. I pulled him close, feeling the tension slowly leaving his shoulders. He buried his face in my neck, and I felt him shudder. A dry, silent sob shook his chest, the release of 30 years of held breath. "I am proud of you," I whispered. He pulled back and looked at me. "So, what happens now? We own the company. I am unemployed. And my father is going to spend the rest of his life trying to destroy us." "He can try," I said. "But he is fighting outside his weight class now." I walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of wine. I poured 2 glasses. I handed one to him. "We need to be clear about something. Nolan," I said, leaning back against the counter. "I am accepting your resignation. You are not going to work at Wexford Dominion. Not yet. I didn't expect to, he said. I can't go back there while the transition is happening. It would be too messy. Exactly, I said. I am going to burn it down. Figuratively, I am going to gut the management structure. I am going to implement the new compliance protocols. I am going to integrate the Asterhaven systems. It is going to be ugly. There will be audits. There will be investigations. People you grew up with are going to be fired because they were complicit in your father's fraud. Do it, Nolan said. They knew what they were doing. And while I'm doing that, I said, looking him in the eye, I need to know where you stand. Because if you wake up tomorrow and feel guilty, if you wake up and miss the country club access, or the deference, or the easy money, tell me now. Because I am not stopping. I am not turning back, even if you beg me. I won't beg, Nolan said. I don't want the easy money. I want to build something real. Good, I said. Because I have a job for you, but it isn't at Wexford. Where is it? Asterhaven needs a director of philanthropy, I said. Someone to manage the community outreach programs. Someone to make sure we are actually helping the families in the regions where we operate. It is not a glamour job. It is hard work. You will be dealing with real people, not board members. Nolan smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. Affordable housing initiatives? Among other things, I said. It is what you wanted to do before Harlan told you it was small thinking. I would love that, Nolan said. Then it is yours, I said. But you start at the bottom of the pay scale. No nepotism. Deal, he said. He took a sip of wine. He looked around the kitchen. It was the same kitchen we had stood in that morning. But it felt different. The air was lighter. The shadows didn't seem as dark. Addison, he said. Thank you. For what? Buying your father's company? No, he said. For forcing me to choose. If you hadn't put that line in the sand, I would have stayed on that side of it forever. I would have become him. You were never him, I said. You were just haunting his house. I put my glass down. Tomorrow is Monday, I said. The signing is at 8 o'clock. Harlan is banned from the building. But I want you there. I thought I resigned. You did, I said. But you are still my husband, and I want you standing next to me when I sign the papers. I want him to see the photos. I want him to see that you didn't just leave him. You joined me. Nolan nodded. He set his glass down next to mine. I will be there, he said, and I will wear a tie that he hates. For the first time in 3 days. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Perfect, I said. The line in the sand had been drawn, and for the first time in our marriage, we were both standing on the same side of it. Harlan Wexford was alone in the dark, screaming at a disconnected phone. We were in the light, and we were ready to work. The final 48 hours were not a negotiation. They were a siege. If Friday was the shock and Saturday was the maneuver, then Sunday was the strangulation. Harlan Wexford did not accept his defeat with the grace of a captain going down with his ship. Instead, he thrashed. He spent the entire weekend running a frantic, chaotic sprint to find a way out of the cage I had built around him. He was trying to find money. He was trying to find allies. He was trying to find anything that would allow him to walk into the Monday morning meeting and tell me to go to hell. But I had blocked the exits. By Sunday morning, my command center in the study looked like air traffic control. I had Elias Rook and his team working in shifts, monitoring every single financial move Harlan tried to make. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the alert came in. He is trying to sell the Texas grid, Elias told me over the secure line. He is on the phone with a consortium in Houston. He is offering a fire sale price. He wants to liquidate the asset immediately to generate cash liquidity. If he gets that cash, he can pay off the bank loans and stabilize the stock without your capital. He can't sell Texas, I said calmly. It is a core asset. He needs board approval. He is bypassing the board, Elias said. He is claiming executive emergency powers. He is trying to push the sale through as a solvency measure. I looked at the digital certificate of debt I had purchased through North Cove Capital, the $50 million personal loan that Harlan had guaranteed with his voting shares. "Block it," I ordered. "How?" "North Cove Capital just called the loan," I said. "We are asserting a lien on his voting shares due to the change of control triggered by the stock drop. Send a legal injunction to the Houston Consortium. Tell them that the chairman of Wexford Dominion does not currently have the clear legal authority to alienate assets because his personal stake is under contested foreclosure." "That is vicious," Elias said. "You are freezing his hands while he is trying to write a check." "Do it." 20 minutes later, the deal in Texas died. The Houston Consortium pulled out the moment they smelled a legal battle. Harlan was left holding a phone that nobody wanted to answer. By noon, the battlefield shifted from the boardroom to the living rooms of America. Harlan's PR team, desperate to change the narrative, had evidently decided to double down on the character assassination, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had dug into my past, hoping to find skeletons. They hoped to find a scandal. Instead, they found a story. I watched the news feed on my center monitor. A cable news segment was running a special report titled, "The Cinderella of the Grid." They had found my employment records from when I was 19. They found out that I had worked double shifts as a waitress in a diner in Ohio to pay for my undergraduate degree. They found out that my father was a mechanic and my mother was a schoolteacher. They found out that I had built my first company out of a garage with a loan I had begged for. Harlan thought this would embarrass me. He thought the world would look at my calloused hands and see low class. He forgot that the world hates billionaires who inherit their money. But they love billionaires who earn it. "She is the American dream," the news anchor said, her voice filled with admiration. "Addison Rivera started with nothing. Harlan Wexford started with a trust fund. And now, she is coming to save his company. It is not just a takeover, it is a reckoning." Public opinion didn't just shift, it solidified. I wasn't the spurned wife anymore. I was the champion. I was the woman who had scrubbed floors and was now buying the building. Harlan, in contrast, looked like exactly what he was. A spoiled prince throwing a tantrum because a commoner had outsmarted him. Then, at 2:00 in the afternoon, the real bomb dropped. It wasn't my doing. I had the file from Marcus Sterling, the lifeboat file containing the evidence of fraud, but I had held it back. I was keeping it as the nuclear option for Monday morning. But Marcus Sterling was a nervous man, and nervous men make preemptive strikes. I was on the phone with Nolan when the notification lit up my screen. It was a push alert from the Wall Street Journal. Breaking. Wexford Dominion CFO blows whistle on systemic accounting irregularities. Department of Justice to launch preliminary inquiry. I clicked the link. The article was detailed. It was devastating. It cited anonymous internal sources and provided specific examples of how Wexford had capitalized maintenance costs to inflate profits. It mentioned the offshore debt. It mentioned the fake vendor contracts. Marcus hadn't just leaked it to me, he had leaked it to the press. He was so terrified of going to prison that he had decided to become the government's star witness before the government even knew there was a crime. I sat back in my chair. "Well," I said to the empty room, "that accelerates things." My phone rang. It was George Pendergast, the board member I had pressured during the meeting. "Addison," he said. He sounded breathless, like he was hyperventilating. "Did you see the journal?" "I am reading it now." "George." "This is a disaster," he said. "The DOJ is going to raid the building. The stock is going to be delisted. If they freeze our accounts, we can't make payroll on Friday. The company dies this week." "Not if you have a new owner," I said. "Not if you have a clean break." "We need to sign," George pleaded. "We need to sign the deal with you tomorrow morning. You are the only one who can talk to the DOJ. You have the clean hands. If we show them that we have fired Harlan and brought in Asterhaven, maybe they will show leniency." "That is the plan, George," I said. "Make sure the rest of the board understands that if that deal isn't signed at 8:00 tomorrow, I walk away, and you all go to jail." "We will be there," George promised. We will drag Harlan there if we have to. But Harlan wasn't done. He had one last desperate move left in his playbook. At 6 o'clock in the evening, my personal phone rang. It was Harlan. I let it ring twice before answering. I put it on speaker so Nolan, who was sitting on the couch reading a book on nonprofit management, could hear. "Hello? Harlan?" I said. "Addison," he said. His voice was different. The rage was gone, replaced by a strained, terrifyingly fake civility. It was the voice of a salesman trying to sell a car with no engine. "I think we need to talk. Just you and me. No lawyers." "I am listening," I said. "Look," he said. "Things have gotten heated. Mistakes were made on both sides. I admit that. I was under stress. You were emotional. But we are family. We shouldn't be destroying each other in the press." "I haven't said a word to the press, Harlan," I reminded him. "The press is just reading your balance sheet." "Fine," he snapped, his patience fraying for a second before he reeled it in. "Here is the thing. I have been thinking. This acquisition, it makes sense financially. I am willing to support it. But we need to structure it differently." "Differently how?" "I will step down as CEO." Harlan said, "I will give you the title. You can have the win. But I stay on as chairman of the board. Just an advisory role, to guide the transition. And Nolan. We will make Nolan a senior vice president. Give him a real salary. We keep the family in control. You, me, and Nolan. The triumvirate." I looked at Nolan. He shook his head slowly. He didn't want the title. He didn't want the bribe. "You want to stay as chairman," I repeated. "After the DOJ investigation was just announced? After you called me trash?" "It is a ceremonial title," Harlan insisted. "It saves face. It keeps the market calm. Addison, be reasonable. You can't just throw me out on the street. I built this. I deserve a seat at the table." I closed my eyes. He still didn't understand. He thought this was a negotiation about power sharing. He thought he could barter with me. "Harlan," I said softly, "I am not negotiating with a man who confuses respect with permission." "What does that mean?" he demanded. "It means you don't get a seat," I said. "You don't get a title. You don't get to advise me. The terms are final. Total exit, or I let the DOJ dismantle the company piece by piece." "You wouldn't dare," Harlan snarled, the mask slipping again. "You want this company. You need this company." "I don't need anything," I said. "I have Asterhaven. I have my reputation. I have your son. You are the one who needs a parachute." "You think you have won?" Harlan laughed darkly. "You think you are the only buyer in town? Let me tell you something. Little girl, I have a meeting in an hour with Sun Valley Gridworks." I didn't react. I waited. "That is right," Harlan gloated. "Your biggest competitor. I called the CEO of Sun Valley. He is flying in tonight. He hates you. He hates Asterhaven. When I show him the books, the real books, he will buy Wexford just to spite you. He will give me the chairman's seat just to watch you lose." "Is that so?" I asked. "Yes," Harlan said. "So you have 1 hour to change your mind. Take the deal. Keep me as chairman, or I sell to Sun Valley, and you get nothing." I looked at the clock. It was 6:10. "Harlan," I said, "did the CEO of Sun Valley mention that he had lunch with me yesterday?" Silence. "We met at the Four Seasons," I continued, my voice conversational. "We had the sea bass. It was excellent. We discussed the Florida market. We agreed that a bidding war would be bad for both of us. So we made a deal. Asterhaven takes the coastal grid, which is Wexford. Sun Valley takes the inland expansion. We carved up the map. Harlan, he isn't flying in to buy you. He isn't coming at all." I could hear Harlan's breathing on the other end, ragged, panicked. "You are lying," he whispered. "Call him," I challenged. "Call him right now. See if he picks up." I hung up the phone. Nolan looked at me from the couch. "Did you really meet with Sun Valley?" "Yes," I said. "I gave them the rights to the Georgia border expansion. It cost me 5% of the potential market. but it bought me a clear field in Florida. It was worth it. Nolan shook his head in disbelief. You cut off his last retreat before he even knew he was retreating. That is how you win a war. Nolan, I said, you don't fight the army. You burn the bridge they plan to use. The rest of the night passed in a suffocating silence. We ate dinner quietly. We packed Nolan's things, just in case. We prepared the clothes we would wear in the morning, at 11 o'clock at night. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text message from Harlan. I stared at the screen. He was alone in that massive mansion, surrounded by 20 empty bedrooms, facing a morning that would strip him of his identity. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was lashing out with the last weapon he had. Guilt. You will destroy this family. The text read. I looked at the words. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about the way he had made Nolan freeze. I thought about Nolan's mother, fading away in that house until she was a ghost. I thought about the years of insults, the silent cuts, the laughter of his rich friends. I didn't hesitate. I typed my reply. You destroyed it at dinner. I hit send. I turned off the phone. I turned off the lights in the study. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a blade. The sun rose at 6:30, casting a pale, clinical light over the city. I stood in front of the mirror in the master bedroom. I was not wearing a floral dress. I was not wearing pastels. I put on a black suit. It was tailored, sharp, and severe. It was armor. Nolan stood beside me. He was wearing the tie I had picked out. It was a deep, vibrant red, a color Harlan considered aggressive and gauche. It was a declaration of independence around his neck. Are you ready? I asked him. Nolan adjusted his cuffs. He looked at himself in the mirror, then at me. I am ready. Remember, I said, when we walk into that room, we don't look at the floor. We don't apologize. We are not asking for permission to buy the company. We are arriving to take possession. I know, Nolan said. We walked out to the car. My sensible gray sedan was gone. In its place, parked in the driveway, was a black town car sent by the Astor Haven security team. We got in. The driver nodded. To Wexford Dominion Tower, I said. The drive was short, as the skyscraper came into view, piercing the morning sky. I saw the news vans parked outside. I saw the cameras. I saw the crowd of employees standing near the entrance, anxious, waiting to see who would control their fate. They were waiting for a savior. Harlan Wexford was probably already upstairs, sitting in the boardroom, clutching his pen, hoping for a miracle. He was hoping I would blink. He was hoping I would offer him mercy. He was wrong. I checked my watch. It was 7:55. Let's go, I said. The car stopped. The door opened, and Addison Rivera stepped out onto the pavement, ready to play the final card. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Wexford Dominion Tower was not designed for surrenders. It was designed for coronations. The walls were lined with oil portraits of dead men who had looked down on the world with approval for a century. The table was a slab of ancient oak that could seat 30 people. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic dominance over the city skyline, a visual reminder that the people inside this room were above the laws of gravity that bound everyone else. But today, the room felt less like a throne room and more like a sterile operating theater waiting for an amputation. I arrived at 7:45 in the morning. I did not come alone. I walked in flanked by Elias Rook, 3 senior partners from Rook and Vale, and 2 representatives from the investment bank that was financing the transition. We moved as a phalanx, a wall of black suits and grim expressions. There was no theatricality to it. We placed our briefcases on the table in unison. We opened our laptops. We arranged the documents in precise, neat stacks. The members of the board of directors were already seated. They looked like statues that had begun to crack. George Pendergast was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, though the air conditioning was set to a frigid 68 degrees. Elaine, the woman who had voted with us yesterday, gave me a curt, terrified nod. They knew what was coming. They knew that the DOJ investigation announced in the newspapers yesterday was a ticking bomb. And I was the only bomb squad in town. At 8 o'clock exactly, the heavy double doors swung open. Harlan Wexford entered. He was late. It was a power move he had used for 40 years, making people wait to establish his importance. He strode into the room with his chest puffed out, wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. He looked around the table, expecting the ritual he was used to. He expected the scraping of chairs. He expected the board members to stand up out of respect. He expected the air to shift around him. Nobody moved. Not a single person stood up. George Pendergast looked down at his papers. Elaine stared out the window. The bankers typed silently on their keyboards. The silence was deafening. It was the sound of authority evaporating. Harlan froze mid-step. He looked at the seated board members, his face twitching with a confusion that quickly curdled into rage. He looked at me, sitting at the opposite end of the table, not at the head, but near the lawyers, where the real work happened. "Is this how we start?" Harlan sneered, walking to the empty chairman's seat. "With disrespect, I am still the chairman of this company until the ink is dry. Ladies and gentlemen, you would do well to remember who signs your bonus checks." "Nobody is signing bonus checks this year." "Harlan," George said, his voice low and weary. "Sit down." Harlan's head snapped toward his old friend. "Excuse me?" "Sit down," George repeated, louder this time. "We are already under DOJ scrutiny. Let's not add obstruction of a restructuring meeting to the list of charges." Harlan glared at him, his nostrils flaring. But he sat. He looked smaller in the big leather chair than I remembered. "Fine," Harlan spat. "Let's get this over with. Where is the revised offer? I assume my daughter-in-law has come to her senses and included the advisory role we discussed." He looked at me with a challenge in his eyes. Daring me to humiliate him in front of an audience, I didn't blink. I nodded to Elias. Elias slid a single, thick document across the polished oak. It stopped in front of Harlan. "This is the final asset purchase agreement," Elias said formally. "It includes the full acquisition of all outstanding shares of Wexford Dominion by Asterhaven Systems at the agreed price of $32 a share. It also includes the immediate resignation of the current executive team and the complete dissolution of the current board." Harlan didn't open the document. He just stared at the cover. "And the advisory role?" Harlan asked, his voice tight. "The chairman emeritus title?" "It is not in there," I said. Harlan's hands curled into fists on the table. "Then I don't sign. It is that simple. I control the voting block. I veto this deal. You can take your lawyers and get out of my building." He looked around the table, seeking allies. "I am shutting this down. We will find another buyer. We will fight the DOJ. I am not handing my legacy over to her on these terms." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They were terrified of him. Even now, the habit of obedience is hard to break. "You don't have a veto." "Harlan," I said. "I have 51% of the voting shares," he shouted. "I am the majority shareholder. Nothing happens in this company without my say-so." "Actually," I said, my voice calm and level, cutting through his volume like a razor. "You don't." I reached into my own portfolio. I pulled out a document bound in blue legal cardstock. I placed it on top of the acquisition agreement. "This," I said, "is a notice of default and immediate call on personal debt." Harlan frowned. "What?" "5 years ago," I explained, speaking to the room but looking only at him. "You took out a personal loan of $50 million from a private credit fund in the Caymans to cover gambling losses. You secured that loan with a personal guarantee pledging your Class A voting shares as collateral." Harlan went pale. "That is private financial business. That has nothing to do with this company." "It does when the loan is sold," I said. "Last night, North Cove Capital Partners purchased your debt note from the Cayman Fund. North Cove Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary of Asterhaven Systems." I leaned forward. "I own your debt, Harlan, and under the terms of the loan. The drop in Wexford's stock price this week triggered a change of control default clause. I am calling the loan. Right now. You owe me $50 million, payable immediately in cash. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drives. I don't have $50 million in cash, Harlan stammered. My liquidity is tied up in the… I know you don't, I said coldly. Which means, pursuant to the collateral agreement, I am exercising my right to seize the collateral. Your voting shares are now the property of North Cove Capital. I looked at the board members. Mr. Wexford no longer holds a voting majority, I announced. In fact, he holds 0 votes. I control his block, and I am voting yes on the acquisition. Harlan sat back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He had walked in thinking he held the keys to the castle. He just found out I had changed the locks while he was sleeping. You can't do that, he whispered. That is theft. That is contract law. Elias corrected him. We will move to a vote, George Pendergast said quickly, sensing the blood in the water. All in favor of the acquisition by Asterhaven Systems under the terms provided? Yes, George said. Yes, Elaine said. Yes, said the treasurer. Yes, said the secretary. It went around the table. Every single hand went up. They weren't voting because they loved me. They weren't voting because they thought I was a genius. They were voting because they were terrified of bankruptcy. And I was the only person in the room with a checkbook big enough to keep them out of prison. The motion carries, George said. The company is sold. Elias opened the signature page of the main contract. He placed a fountain pen on top of it. He pushed it toward Harlan. We need your signature to formalize the resignation and the transfer of title, Elias said. Technically, we could do it without you since we seized the shares, but it is cleaner this way. Sign it, and we agree not to pursue personal litigation for the accounting fraud. Harlan looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, probably one he had bought with company money. He looked at me. His eyes were red, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who had spent 3 days fighting a ghost and losing. You planned this, he rasped. From the beginning, you planned to humiliate me. I didn't plan anything until Friday night, I said. You wrote the script. Harlan, I just directed the ending. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly the tip tapped against the paper. Tap, 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 like a nervous heartbeat. He hesitated, looking at the letters of his own name typed on the resignation line. Harlan Wexford, departing chairman. He signed. It was a jagged, ugly scrawl. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the document and fell onto the table with a final clatter. Done, he whispered. Are you happy? You have the chair. You have the company. You have my son. You took everything. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of joy. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. I didn't take anything, I said. I recovered it. I stood up. Mr. Rook, I said. Please read the transition protocols. Elias cleared his throat. Effective immediately. All executive access badges for Mr. Wexford are deactivated. All company accounts in his name are frozen pending audit. An ethics hotline has been established for employees to report past grievances. A forensic accounting firm will arrive at noon to begin a full audit of the last 5 years. Harlan stood up shakily. I am leaving. I don't need to listen to this. One more thing, I said. Harlan stopped. The personnel terms, I said. We are retaining 98% of the workforce, the engineers, the support staff, the maintenance crews. Their jobs are safe. Their pensions are fully funded. Harlan scoffed. You are keeping the little people. How noble. They are the company. Harlan, I said. You were just the overhead. I built this, Harlan screamed. The sudden volume made everyone jump. He slammed his hands on the table, leaning toward me, his face purple. I built this tower. I built this grid. I gave these people lives. None of this exists without me. I looked at him. I looked at the veins bulging in his neck. I looked at the fear behind the rage. You built the walls, I said quietly. but you used them to make people feel small. You used your power to terrify your wife, your son, and your employees. You thought fear was a foundation. I picked up the signed contract. That is why you can't keep it, I said. Fear is not structural, it is just rot, and we are remodeling. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Security, please come to the boardroom. The doors opened instantly. 2 guards walked in. They weren't the usual building security. They were my team. Big, silent, professional. Please escort Mr. Wexford to the exit, I said. Harlan straightened his jacket. He tried to summon one last shred of dignity. I know the way out. I will take the executive elevator. I am afraid that is not possible, I said. The executive elevator requires a valid badge. Yours was deactivated 2 minutes ago. Harlan froze. You will have to use the service elevator, I said. It is down the hall, past the break room. The color drained from his face completely. The service elevator, the one used for trash removal and deliveries, the one the staff used. You can't be serious, he whispered. Trash doesn't ride in the executive lift. Harlan, I said. It goes where the staff goes. He stared at me with pure hatred, but behind the hate, there was shock. He was finally seeing the mirror I had held up to him. He was finally feeling the exact size of the box he had put me in. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out, flanked by the guards. He walked stiffly, like a man marching to the gallows. I watched him go. I watched the doors swing shut behind him. The room exhaled. George Pendergast slumped in his chair. It is done. It is just starting, I corrected him. I turned to the side of the room. Nolan was standing there. He had been silent the entire time, witnessing the dismantling of his father's empire. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. Then he looked at me. He walked over and stood beside me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was solid. He was wearing the red tie. Are we putting out the statement? He asked. Yes, I said. I nodded to the PR director, who had been waiting in the corner. Release it. Seconds later, the notification hit the wires. I saw it pop up on the banker's tablets. Asterhaven Systems completes acquisition of Wexford Dominion. Company enters new era. Under non-toxic leadership, stock jumps 15% on news. Non-toxic leadership. Nolan read the headline off the screen. He is going to see that. It is going to kill him. He is alive, I said. He has his health. He has his mansion. He just doesn't have his audience anymore. That is a fate worse than death for a narcissist. I looked around the boardroom. The portraits of the dead men seemed less imposing now. They were just paintings. Let's get to work, I said to the board. We have a pension fund to save. Epilogue. The house was quiet. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. A week after the signing, we were sitting at our small kitchen table, the one with the scratch on the side from when we moved in. There were no crystal chandeliers. There were no servants standing in the shadows. There was just a pot of spaghetti in the middle of the table and a bottle of affordable red wine. Nolan twirled his fork. He looked tired but happy. He had spent the last 5 days visiting the field offices in rural Florida, setting up the new community support programs. He had dirt under his fingernails. He looked like a man who actually worked for a living. I got a call from the legal team today, Nolan said. Harlan is trying to sue for emotional distress. He says the service elevator incident was cruel and unusual. Let him sue, I said, taking a sip of wine. Elias needs a hobby. He also called me, Nolan said. I put my fork down. Did you answer? No, Nolan said. I let it go to voicemail. He left a 2-minute message about how ungrateful I am and how I will come crawling back when you inevitably divorce me. And I deleted it, Nolan said. I didn't even listen to the end. He looked at me across the table. The candlelight flickered in his eyes. You saved me, Addison, he said. You know that, right? You didn't just save the company. You saved me from becoming him. You were never going to be him, I said. You just needed to see that the throne was made of cardboard. I looked around our modest kitchen. It wasn't a mansion in Palmcrest. It wasn't a place where senators came to dinner to discuss legislation, but it was warm. It was honest. And nobody in this house was afraid. "We have less money now," Nolan said, grinning. "Technically, since you spent the liquid capital on the debt purchase." "We have enough," I said. "We have the company, we have the future, and we have the truth." I picked up my bowl. I looked at the simple pasta. It tasted better than the $500 truffle soup at the Wexford estate ever had. "We don't confuse money with worth," I said, repeating the lesson I had learned the hard way. Nolan raised his glass. He looked at me with a love that was finally, completely free of fear. "And we don't let trash decide who belongs," he said. We clinked glasses. The sound was clear and bright, ringing like a bell in the quiet house. Outside, the world kept turning, the markets kept trading. Harlan Wexford sat in his empty mansion, screaming at walls that no longer listened. But in here, at this small table, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. We were home. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from to connect and share your thoughts. We invite you to subscribe to the Monica Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.